Chapter 235. The busy Monday. Klein was in no hurry to confirm his general assumptions. He pretended that nothing had happened and turned the page so that it faced him. The information he wrote about Ian Wright was completely true. He would still get a positive answer even if he used divination techniques to confirm. Therefore, he believed that the people under the ambassador's charge would follow this investigation's trail and gain something in return. It was unlikely that they would have the motivation to seek revenge on him for the time being. Similarly, he would continue to spread the paper out on his desk for the military special department who were monitoring him. It would direct their attention away from him as they shifted their focus to Ian Wright. It would then be a race against time to find him before the ambassador. This way, Klein would be even safer. It feels like I'm walking on a tightrope. Is this a clown's special trick? He shook his head in amusement. He opened the oriel window, hoping to take in the fresh morning air, but there was thick, choking smog outside that made him quietly close the windows. Pressing down the paper with Ian's information with an ink bottle, Klein went to the closest bathroom and quickly washed up. He then picked up the black double-breasted suit and the half-top hat that hung from the rack and walked all the way to the first floor. He had an appointment with lawyer Jürgen for breakfast today. Pulling his black silver-inlaid cane from the umbrella stand in the foyer, Klein walked along the edge of the street in a thick fog that provided visibility of no more than 10 meters until he reached 58 Minsk Street. He rang the doorbell of the dock house. As the clanging sound echoed, a black green-eyed cat with a raised tail suddenly appeared in his mind. Brody the black cat walked straight to the door. After preparing itself for 2 seconds, it leaped up and grabbed the handle of the door. Then, it inevitably fell and twisted the handle with its weight, and opened the door. With a creak, the morning wind blew in, and the door slowly opened. Brody the black cat glanced at Klein haughtily as it walked to the side. "What a clever cat," Klein praised as he faced the old lady, Doris in her white apron. Doris laughed as her wrinkles eased. "It depends on its mood. Most of the time it acts stupid, as though it doesn't know what you're talking about. Oh, I've prepared my best bean turnip soup for you. Eat it with bread." Bean turnip soup. Sounds like something randomly mashed together. Klein smiled. "I'm looking forward to it." The lawyer came out of the bathroom. Even at home, regardless if he had just woken up, he was dressed to the nines. His white shirt was ironed and his brownish-yellow vest was tightly fitted, the lines of his trousers appearing to be freshly ironed. "The contract you wanted is complete. Check to see if there are any omissions." Jürgen's blue eyes swept over. He didn't make small talk as he went straight to the point. His brown hair was neatly combed back, and the sheen from the pomade was unmistakable. "All right." Klein leaned his cane, took off his hat and coat, and followed Jürgen into the study on the first floor, where he received a thick contract. He stood there, casually flipping through it. The more he read, the more his head hurt. In the end, he only skimmed through the key clauses. "I hope that everything that's needed is in there, as well as the previously omitted clauses, such as the establishment of the 3 instances that will determine how much money is to be supplied to Leopard based on his progress, rather than a lump sum payment of £100. The first instance involves £50. Yes, that way I won't have to go to the Backland Bank for the time being and take out the remaining £100 from my anonymous account. What I have on me is enough." Klein closed the document, smiled at Jürgen, and said, "I'm satisfied. Your professional skills are better than I imagined." As he said that, he took out 2 £1 notes that he had prepared. Jürgen took the money, gave Klein the remaining contracts, and said in a serious tone, "If an error is made during the signing, there are 2 extra copies. Remember to shred the remaining contracts when everything is over." The current iteration of shredding machines was a hand-cranked mechanical shredder. Klein was about to nod his head, when Mrs. Doris suddenly shouted from the dining room, "Good lads, it's time for breakfast." "My grandmother's hearing has deteriorated," Jürgen explained as he invited Klein with a hand gesture. Klein followed him into the dining room and saw that Mrs. Doris had scooped out a spoonful of yellow and green liquid from a black pot, and poured it onto the corresponding plate. "Here, try the bean turnip soup. Here's your bread." Mrs. Doris smiled and pointed to the suspicious pile of food. Klein looked at Jürgen, who looked even more serious than before. His heart skipped a beat. Forcing himself to sit, Klein broke off a piece of white bread, dipped it in the yellow-green soup, and stuffed it into his mouth with the spirit of an adventurer. He was surprised to find that the flavor was actually quite good. The faint salty taste had a sweet tang to it that stimulated his appetite. It also perfectly brought out the soft, fragrant flavor of the bread. My grandmother was once an excellent cook, Jugan said casually as he slowly savored his breakfast. Then why do you have to keep a straight face? I really don't have any appetite watching you eat. Klein lampooned silently before immersing himself into the relaxed and happy feelings brought by the delicacy. After leaving the Jurgens, he made 3 transfers to Surd Street in St. George Borough, where he made a formal agreement and paid Leopard the first £50. The second sum of £30 would be paid in 2 weeks' time, depending on Leopard's progress. At this point, Klein was left with only £21.08 solely. Then, he returned to Cherwood Borough and went to the public library to read the Tussock Times of the past year in search of news regarding the Intis ambassador to the Lone Kingdom. When it was almost noon, he finally saw the black and white photo and confirmed that it was the one he had seen in his dream divination. Bakerland Jean Madun. Klein recited the Intis Republic's ambassador's name silently. He left the library and found a small restaurant for lunch. At 10 minutes to 3, Klein pretended to take a nap. He drew the curtains, took 4 steps in the counterclockwise direction, and arrived above the gray fog. He first divined if the military special department had relaxed their surveillance on him and received a positive result. He then wrote a divination statement that he had thought of in the morning, the infiltrator from last night. Leaning back in his chair, he muttered the sentence. Klein's eyelids drooped as he fell asleep. His bedroom came into view in a world of illusion, separation, and obscurity. At that moment, Klein saw a black shadow squirming in the crack at the bottom of the door. A slender, iron-black threadworm drilled its way into the room. It arched at the center and then flattened itself, constantly repeating it as it proceeded towards the desk. Its movements were extremely stiff, as though it had broken down a series of slow motions, making it appear quite odd. The black threadworm crept to the front of the desk and crawled to the top, leaving a trail of quickly evaporating mucus behind. It stopped at the written piece regarding Ian Wright. Its head lifted up as the middle of its body rose, leaving only the tail to support the body. At this moment, it was just like a human. After examining it for a moment, the black iron threadworm turned the paper around and disappeared back the way it came from. So that was the case. That is to say, it wasn't that the infiltrator didn't want to take revenge on me last night. He simply didn't have the ability to do so. Unless this iron-black threadworm is highly venomous. Klein nodded in enlightenment. He then used divination and obtained confirmation that the Beyonder who manipulated the black iron threadworm had done so under Ambassador Bakerland's orders. After doing all of this, he completely covered the paper bag in the corner with grey fog and sent a message to the son, Derek. When the hands of the pocket watch were in place, Klein pulled Injustice, the Hanged Man, and the Sun at the same time. This week's Tarot Club happened as scheduled. The familiar grey fog and blurry human silhouettes appeared. Audrey, who had successfully advanced to Sequence 8, half stood up, lifted her skirt, and happily greeted them. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. Good afternoon, Mr. Sun." Klein, who had activated his spirit vision earlier, noticed the change in the surface layer of the astral projection in the depths of Miss Justice's ether body with the help of the grey fog's uniqueness. With a chuckle, he said, "Welcome, our Miss Telepathist." Audrey smiled reservedly and said a few words of humility before turning to face the person across her. "Mr. Hanged Man, you should be handing this week's 6 pages. Perhaps, when Mr. Fool reads it, he will think of something and shares with us a little more of his general knowledge." The corners of her mouth curled up in anticipation. Alger nodded and began to produce the 6 pages of Roselle's diary with Klein's help. Previously, he had thought about consulting the Fool about whether he should directly submit the rest of the diary via a sacrifice. However, seeing that the Fool didn't seem too interested or take the initiative to mention it, he gave up on this idea. And this was in line with his understanding of the Fool. Roselle's diary had a certain effect on the godlike man, Mr. Fool, but it wasn't that great. He would collect it, but he definitely wasn't in a rush. The 6 pages of the diary were completed very quickly. As Alger was about to offer it to the Fool who sat at the end of the long bronze table, he suddenly remembered something. He hurriedly said respectfully, "Mr. Fool, I have obtained a piece of information related to the secret order." There was no obstruction of information on the ocean. It just wasn't timely enough. The pirates also valued intelligence and often sent people to the colonial island to exchange information that they had gathered. It was through these channels that Alger learned something about the secret order. "Very good." Klein nodded his head slightly, giving his permission to the Hanged Man to recount what he knew. He didn't stop the presence of Miss Justice and the Sun from letting him speak. This would help the former gather more information about the secret order, while the latter understood nothing. At the same time, he allowed the 6-page diary to appear in his hands. The Hanged Man said unhurriedly, "The secret order has some connection with the Intis Republic." The Intis Republic. Yes, Emperor Republic was from Intis, and Zeratul had sought him out in Trier, the capital of Intis. The secret order was also involved in the famous incident at Intis. Well, it's not too surprising that the secret order still has some connection with the Intis Republic today. After validating this new piece of information with what he knew, Klein confirmed that the information provided by the Hanged Man was true. Just in time, I'm going to deal with the ambassador of the Intis Republic. Klein was in no hurry to read Roselle's diary. He looked up at the three members. Chapter 236. Internal Commission. As Klein's knowledge of mysticism and beyonders deepened, as well as his experiments with some of the powers of the space above the gray fog, he no longer felt anxious when facing Justice, the Hanged Man, and the Sun. He became less preoccupied with maintaining an enigmatic and unfathomable image, so as to prevent the Tarot Club members from keenly noticing his facade. He now knew that although the deities in this world were powerful and bizarre, they were by no means omniscient and omnipotent. This description was something that only the legendary creator of everything could do, one that only the City of Silver was still worshipping. The deities had their limitations, and the deities could also be put into tough situations. That was something Klein could now confirm. Be it the Book of Storms or the Revelation of Evernight, they more or less touched upon this. Therefore, at the recent tarot gathering, Klein was consciously building character traits, slowly shaping himself into a restricted powerhouse who, for some reason, couldn't move freely but was almost a deity. This way, even if he occasionally showed that he didn't understand certain things and occasionally asked for help, it wouldn't arouse the suspicion of the Tarot Club members. Of course, the premise of all this was that, through his previous attempts and through the power displayed by his adorer, Azik, he had undoubtedly embedded the image of a deity-like existence into the minds of Justice, the Hanged Man, and the Sun Few. I hope that this building of character traits will succeed. That way, I won't have to worry about not being able to answer their questions in the future. Of course, things that are part of general knowledge still have to be known, and I shouldn't show fear. Klein tapped the edge of the ancient table and said with a chuckle, "I want to issue a mission." Mission? Audrey's ears pricked up slightly as her eyes widened. She was astonished, expectant, and perturbed at the same time. She clearly remembered that this was the first time that Mr. Fool had officially issued a mission. Although he had previously made a few requests, they all involved prepaid rewards. It seemed like he had randomly selected missions to conform to the principle of equal exchange. This time he used the word issue. As a telepathist, Audrey was already very good at reading the hidden meanings behind words. At the same time, she keenly realized that although the Hanged Man appeared to remain unperturbed, he was actually abnormally tense. As for the Sun, he seemed to be muddle-headed, treating this as a very normal thing. You can choose to accept it or not. With the help of his clown's powers, Klein's tone sounded much more relaxed. Another adorer of mine has arrived in Backlund. He wants to finish a matter, but it's not convenient for him to show himself. Another adorer. The Hanged Man nodded, seemingly in thought. He wasn't surprised at all. In his eyes, for a powerful godlike existence like Mr. Fool, possessing many adorers was a matter of fact. I wonder what the sequence number of Mr. Fool's adorer is. Well, I still owe his previous adorer a reward. Even though Mr. Fool's reward was paid by Mr. Hanged Man, and he doesn't really care about money, I did pray for help at that time. Furthermore, Rear Admiral Hurricane was killed by that adorer. His adorer would still need some funds for their activities. Audrey thought with some guilt. Frankly speaking, 30,000 gold pounds and a large plantation was an enormous amount of wealth to her. But that alone didn't have any significant effect on her life. It's good having it, but it didn't matter if I didn't. Well, I might feel the pinch a little. Audrey nodded to herself earnestly. As a teenage girl who wasn't considered an adult yet, ignoring the large plantation, she actually didn't have absolute control over the remaining 30,000 pounds. She could only go with her father's arrangements, purchasing some stocks from Backlund Munitions Corporation, and invest in a company that was attempting to spin off some of the technology in ironclad warships for commercial ships. The amount she ultimately received and could be used as an allowance was only 5,000 pounds. However, Her fixed annuity had increased by at least £2,000 from its original range of £15,000 to £25,000. Seeing that Justice and the others hadn't spoken, Klein issued the mission. The task he wants to be completed is the assassination of the Intis Republic ambassador to the Lone Kingdom, Bakerland Jean Madun. Assassinate the Intis Republic's ambassador? Audrey lost her composure as she asked in surprise. This would cause conflict between the two countries and might even be an act of war. As a qualified aristocratic lady, her first thought was about international foreign affairs. As for why Mr. Fool didn't do so himself, she found the answer obvious. Which mighty figure would always be helping their subordinates? After the kingdom suffered defeat at the east coast of Balam, the king didn't personally set off. At most, the general would be replaced and new troops deployed. Rumor has it that His Majesty wanted to set off for the front line, but was stopped by the nobles and officials. Alger was only mildly surprised by the task. His focus was on another matter. Mr. Fool is indeed unable to strongly interfere with the real world. My guess is right. I wonder to what extent can he influence us after establishing our connection. Can he easily take one's life away? Alger, a little pleased with himself, began to let his thoughts wander. Derek blanked out listening to the conversation. What's the Intis Republic? What's an ambassador? These words sound so strange in Jotun. Klein swept his gaze around and maintained his casual attitude. Which one of you is willing to accept this mission? What kind of reward do you want? I can't convince myself to kill an innocent man for no reason. And it could very well lead to a disaster caused by war. Audrey, who wanted to raise her hand, hesitated. Just then, the hanged man chuckled and said, I've heard that this Ambassador Bakerland is also the intelligence chief of the Intis Republic in the kingdom. He secretly supports bloodshed, planned a number of incidents that destroyed the relationship between the nobility and the rich, and spread rumors to incite the public into standing against the government. He seemed to notice the hesitation in Justice, so he described the dark side of Bakerland in detail. Then he added, I'm not sure if the ambassador is a Beyonder, but there are many clues that suggest he may very well be. He has quite a number of Beyonders around him, Beyonders that come under the Intis intelligence web. And this department is influenced by the original royal family in Intis, the Sauron family. They're in control of the early sequences of the Hunter pathway. Moreover, the possibility of a war between the two countries depends only on whether or not the upper echelons of both sides want to fight. It has nothing to do with the life or death of a diplomat. After the assassination of Emperor Roselle, Intis suffered several great shocks but ultimately managed to maintain a stable republican system. Because the Sauron family suffered a brutal blow during Roselle's reign, their strength fell tremendously in all aspects. All they could do was accept the reality and change their goal to fighting for a seat in parliament and secretly influence the country's intelligence department and parts of the army. After listening to the information provided by the hanged man, the hesitation in Audrey's heart disappeared. She gracefully nodded and said, For the past few years, the Faysac Empire has expanded rapidly, having defeated the kingdom and the Intis Republic on the Balam East Coast and the Highlands. As long as we push the blame to them, the higher-ups and the citizens of the Intis Empire, it will be something acceptable and believable. Audrey didn't know much about politics, but with her father being a member of parliament in the House of Lords, she still knew certain things. Be it the shirking of responsibility or shifting the focus onto the kingdom's internal problems, the unpopular northern barbarians were the popular and easiest targets for the nobles and ministers. Whether they did it or not didn't matter. Of course, more than 100 years ago, this role was played by Intis and Roselle. After pondering for a few seconds, Audrey looked at the seat of honor, feeling a little perturbed and a little guilty. Mr. Fool, I can attempt to complete this mission, but I cannot guarantee its success. On the one hand, she was going to find her father and confirm that Ambassador Bakerland was really the head of the Intis Intelligence Service. On the other hand, she wasn't going to do it herself either. As a spectator or a telepathist, neither one of them was good at combat, and all she could do was gather as much information about Ambassador Bakerland from high society as she could and delegate the mission. Well, I could get Zio and Furs to ask Mr. A to do it. Or find the hosts of the other Beyonder circles. I cannot be exposed. Things have to be kept secret, and there might be Intis intelligence agents lurking in those circles. I don't know how much money I'll have to pay, but £5,000 might not be enough. Audrey was already beginning to think of the subsequent plans. Klein didn't pin his hopes on Sequence 8, Miss Justice, to succeed. He nodded and said, "What compensation would you like?" "The formula to the psychiatrist potion," Audrey said before hesitantly adding, "as well as the corresponding Beyonder ingredients." "Oh, we can wait until the mission is completed before discussing further. If it doesn't succeed, I'll bear the expenses. I still owe your Adora the bounty money." "Bounty money?" "So it was given to Miss Justice. £10,000. That's 5,000 if we split it equally." Shrouded in the grey fog, Klein pondered for a few seconds on how much Ambassador Bakerland was worth and finally decided that he was definitely more valuable than Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. "Sure," Klein replied in a normal tone. At this moment, the hanged man Alger added, "I'll also accept this mission. The compensation can be determined after the mission is completed." "Didn't you return to the sea?" Audrey asked in surprise. "Just because I'm not in Backland doesn't mean I can't kill Ambassador Bakerland," Alger said with a smile without giving any detailed explanations. Derek, who was beside him, never had the chance to join in on the conversation. Klein nodded in agreement. "Okay." He immediately turned his gaze to the Roselle diary in his hands. Chapter 237. Sequence 2, October 29th. The leader of the secret order, Zeratul, visited me once again. He didn't mention anything specific and just casually chatted with me. I wasn't able to guess his true intentions. It seems like he just wanted to strengthen the communication between us and understand each other better. I've already met the two high-sequence Beyonders from the church, but I felt that Zeratul was much more powerful and mysterious than them, so I asked him what sequence number he was without much hope, and in the end, he actually answered me. He told me that he was a Sequence 2 miracle invoker. Sequence 2? In the church's categorization, that's the position of an angel, close to that of a deity. He truly is more powerful than the alchemist and arcane scholar that I met before. But my intuition tells me that Zeratul isn't telling the whole truth. Sequence 2 might just be his former position, or that he's about to advance. Miracle invoker? A master at creating miracles? The name of this potion makes one's imagination run wild. This is the corresponding Sequence 2 of Seer, a miracle invoker who controls fate? I tried probing Zeratul if the word miracle refers to the miracle of fate? That the Seer pathway is one that slowly understands and grasps fate so as to control it? Zeratul ignored the first question. He told me that fate is just one of the parts of the Seer pathway, and it's not even its main focus. The pathway that truly represents fate is monster. He raised a few examples which were all potion names of the monster sequence. Sequence 7 the Lucky, Sequence 5 the Lucky, Sequence 2 Soothsayer, and Sequence 1 Snake of Mercury. It's also known as the Snake of Fate. This was the first Sequence 1 I got to know. It hit me right in the face. According to what I know, the monster pathway should be controlled by the Life School of Thought. This school seems to also have parts of the Apothecary Sequence pathway. They propose 3 major divisions: the world of absolute rationality, the world of the spirit, and the material world. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Zeratul told me that the Life School of Thought specializes in astromancy, seeking to use medicine, music, light, wine, and fragrance to eliminate paths with unfavorable star readings and fate. They believe that disasters and diseases are caused by the loss of balance between man and nature, as well as the balance between man and his own mind. He added meaningfully that the Life School of Thought worships the moon. Why worship the moon and not go one step further, the Evernight goddess? This diary took up 2 pages and was clearly copied from both sides of the original. That's a lot of information. Klein sighed in heartfelt silence. This was also the first time he was learning of a Sequence 1 potion's name. Snake of Mercury and Snake of Fate really made one feel a pining for. Similarly, it's my first time learning of a Sequence 2. I now know the corresponding Sequence 2 of Seer. The name Miracle Invoker sounds pretty good. It contains deep meaning and doesn't sound lowly. Of course, compared to Soothsayer, it does seem a little inferior. Fate is only part of the Seer pathway, and it's not even its main focus. I have to remember this. I should constantly reflect on myself and not end up steering towards fate. It might result in the failure of my acting. Zeratul's words don't seem contradictory. The monster pathway is the real path of fate. So, Soothsayer is a Sequence 2. If that's the case, then I already knew of a Sequence 2 in the past. Although he didn't take his eyes off the paper, Klein was seriously considering his own sequence chain. Due to his experience in digesting the two potions, seer and clown, and because he could spy and revere fate, he was able to be a little prescient regarding fate. However, he would still be helpless toward the development of fate. He had slowly been equating the essence of his beyonder pathway to fate. If it wasn't for this diary, it was very likely that he would have used this as a premise to comprehend and act for the subsequent sequences. As for whether or not Zeratul was lying, what Klein was certain of was that the monster pathway was definitely the sequence of fate, which was consistent with what he had seen from the confidential information of the Nighthawks and with the potion name he had heard of earlier, Soothsayer. Now that there was a fate sequence, the seer pathway was unlikely to be a repeat. This would result in some degree of overlapping, and it would be inconsistent with how each of the current sequences had different characteristics. Therefore, Klein was inclined to believe what Zeratul had said. He was inclined to believe that fate was only part of the seer's pathway, not even its main focus. The value of these 2 pages is invaluable to the present me. The alchemist and the arcane scholar should be the higher sequences of the savant pathway. From Roselle's tone, they definitely don't belong to sequence 2 and 1. That is to say, they are sequence 4 and sequence 3. For the time being, it's impossible to determine which is sequence 4 and which is sequence 3. Klein gathered his thoughts, flipped the diary, and continued reading. As for why the life school of thought only worshipped the moon and didn't believe in the Evernight goddess which symbolized the crimson moon, he was unable to ponder too deeply about it due to the lack of information. The 3rd page was Roselle's recount of inventing a practical steam engine. At times, he was afraid of suffering crackdowns, and at other times, afraid that the fruits of his labor would be seized by powerful figures. His words displayed his fear of being persecuted. To think that even Emperor Roselle, who thought of himself as the protagonist of an era, would have such a perturbed and worried side to him. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he flipped to the 4th page of the diary. April 18th. Matilda is pregnant. It's to be expected, and I can even tell you exactly which lovemaking session she conceived in, because I felt a decrease in my beyonder characteristic. Once the conception is successful, my own beyonder characteristic will follow a mysterious connection, and part of it will be transferred to my child. After that, I asked Archbishop Fan Esti worriedly. He told me that this is a normal phenomenon. For sequence 7 and below, beyonder characteristics will not be passed on to the next generation, but it isn't absolute. Sequence 6 and 5 will naturally pass down a portion, but it will not affect the parent's strength. As for the child, they would be born with certain beyonder powers, close to that of sequence 9. But as a result, their pathway is basically fixed. At high sequences, the inheritance of beyonder characteristics is something one can control. One can choose to pass down or not, or one can even choose to pass down just a little bit, a third, half, or all of them. In other words, the children born from high sequence beyonders might be born as beyonders. As for the sequence number, it's up to either one of the parents to decide. I wonder if the descendants of the deities are like this as well. After reading the diary, there were only 2 phrases in Klein's mind: Law of Beyonder Characteristics Indestructibility, and Law of Beyonder Characteristics Conservation. Is the law governing the survival of beyonder creatures? It's no wonder that some magical animals will reproduce only before they die. It's no wonder there would be the phenomenon of increased killing and bloodlust after childbirth. The target would be of their own race or even their partner. This is to supplement their beyonder characteristics. According to this logic, if we trace this all the way back, where did the earliest beyonder characteristics come from? Produced out of thin air? From the creator who created everything? Since Miss Justice had already advanced to telepathist, Klein controlled the urge to nod and continued to leaf through the pages. The 5th page was Roselle's criticisms about how no one could enjoy his pop music and thought that he was making noise, while at the same time, he mused how refreshing stories was a common pursuit of different people from different worlds, and that the popularity of the novels he plagiarized from the Count of Monte Cristo allowed the newspaper he founded to flourish. Emperor, is there anything else you haven't done? With a smile, Klein turned to the 6th and final page. November 10th, I received the great pirate Savigny Solomon in secret at the White Maple Palace. Solomon. I hope that he will plunder my opponents on the new sea route and strike at the ships of Faysac, Lone, and Fainapotter. And I promise to help him advance to a high sequence beyonder. The beyonder pathway of Dark Emperor has names that are as strange as the Demonis pathway: corruption, confusion, the fallen, disorder. However, in order to match the Dark Emperor, they added on their own suffixes: Baron of Corruption, Mentor of Confusion, Count of the Fallen, and Prince of Disorder. In order for Savigny to live up to his name, I decided to confer him the title of Count of the Court in secret. Savigny has a child named Nast Solomon, and my intuition tells me that he will dominate the 5 seas in the future. Nast Solomon. The King of the 5 Seas, Nast? Nast, who claims to be a descendant of the Solomon Empire. To think that he was born during the Roselle period. Klein was stunned. Since Roselle had mentioned the term New Sea Route, Klein had easily determined the corresponding year. It was in 1194 that the New Sea Route was discovered and the southern continent was found, and Roselle was assassinated in 1198. The diary could only have been written between those 2 years. That also meant that it was about 151 to 155 years ago. If Nast, the King of the 5 Seas, was the Nast Solomon Roselle had spoken of, he's almost 160 years old. Is this due to other reasons, or do high-sequence Beyonders obtain an extension to their lifespan in the first place? Klein thought seriously. He gathered his thoughts and let the diary disappear from his hands. He then looked at Justice and said, "You are free to trade or communicate now." Mr. Fool has no general knowledge to tell us today. Audrey was slightly disappointed. She turned her gaze to Sun and said, "Can I exchange information related to the dragon from you?" She clearly remembered that Mr. Sun called the spectator pathway the dragon pathway, and that he said it originated from the dragon race. "Sure. I want the Sequence 8 potion formula for Bard," answered the son Derek, who had been silent all this while, in hesitation. He had wanted to use this as an exchange for information on the world where Justice and the Hanged Man were living, so that he wouldn't always be confounded by what he heard. However, seeing that his process of digesting the potion was nearing completion, he still made his advancement his top priority. Chapter 238. Dragon of Imagination. Audrey wasn't surprised by the son's request. Since the acting method had proliferated in the City of Silver, then the amount of time that had passed suggested that it was likely that he was close to the end of his digestion period. Seeking the subsequent potion formula was definitely one of his highest priorities. I wonder how the bard acts. Sing poetry every day? When encountering combat, dodge to the side and use his singing to bring courage and strength to his companions. Or perhaps he would first bless himself before charging forward with a hammer or sword raised. I wonder if it will bring about an improvement in his singing ability. If it's possible, then he would definitely be an outstanding singer or opera singer. Audrey thought with great interest. She purposely didn't express her stance in a hurry, so as to not let the son raise the price again. This wasn't something she learned from her tutor or from the Beyonder gatherings she had attended. It was purely a technique she had developed herself after she had advanced to become a telepathist. I will try my best to find the Sequence 8 potion formula corresponding to the Bard pathway, but it won't be today. Are you satisfied with this condition? Audrey said in deliberation before looking at the seat of honor at the ancient table. We can seek Mr. Fool's help to bear witness to this agreement. At that moment, Klein laughed and replied, "Miss Justice, perhaps I can provide the light supplement formula for you." Audrey's eyes lit up as she quickly nodded slightly. "No problem. Then, what should I use to exchange with you?" "I haven't thought of it yet." Klein chuckled and said, "Don't worry, perhaps my adorers will require help in certain matters in the future." His thoughts were very simple. If he allowed Miss Justice to obtain the formula of light supplement in her Beyonder circles, then wouldn't the knowledge he had stolen from the eternal blazing sun at the cost of near immolation be for naught? At the very least, it would be wasted at the Tarot Club. "All right, I will do my best to help them," Audrey promised happily. Klein pressed his hands together and a yellowish-brown piece of goatskin parchment appeared before him. On it was the formula for the light supplement potion, including substitute ingredients and their ancient names. Furthermore, they were all translated to Jotun. Main ingredients: a piece of brilliance rock or powder of dazzling soul, blood of a mirror hedgehog or the heart of a magma titan. Supplementary ingredients: a golden-edged sunflower, 3 drops of aconite juice. With a gentle push, the goatskin appeared in front of the sun. Although he could pray to Mr. Fool to recall the formula even if he forgot it completely, Derek still diligently memorized the formula. It took him quite a while before he said, "Miss Justice, we can talk about the dragons." "Mr. Fool, I seek your permission to speak with Mr. Sun alone." Audrey quickly raised her hand. She originally believed that the Sun would put the appropriate content on paper for her to read, but it would be inconvenient for her to ask questions. She would have to pen her questions and push them back to him. Such a way of communication was utterly cumbersome. Speak with him alone? In such a conversation, you probably wouldn't understand what the sun is saying. Likewise for the sun. Klein nodded as his voice remained placid. All right. In the Beyonder circles, Hermes was a language one had to master. Ancient Hermes was something that one could learn and was relatively popular. Jotun, Dragonese, and Elvish were relatively less popular, so few people knew them. The moment that was said, Klein isolated the hanged man, preventing him from seeing or hearing. Alger had a certain interest in the knowledge of the dragons, but it wasn't enough for him to pay the price of listening, so he kept silent and waited. Seeing that Mr. Fool had made a gesture for them to start talking, the son, Derek, remained silent for a few seconds, organized his words and said, "The dragons are mortal enemies of the giant king. They all look like magnified lizards, and their entire bodies are covered in scales of different colors. Their 4 limbs are thick and powerful, and their wings are wide enough to drive their giant bodies to flight. They are the rulers of the sky. They have a myriad of abilities. Some have the ability to breathe fire, others the ability to command lightning, bring corrosion, or even creating frost. But these are not mainstream among the dragons. The Dragon of the Mind occupies the greatest number of dragons, with Dragon King Ankwelt as their representative. The Beyonder pathway that stems from the Dragon of the Mind is the Spectator. In the City of Silver, we typically call it the Dragon Pathway. With regards to similar trades, Derek had initially prepared to regurgitate the historical texts, but upon discovering that Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man didn't seem to share the same world, he gradually realized the value of the widely known history of the City of Silver. Thus, he only talked about dragons this time and spoke nothing of giants, elves, mutants, phoenixes, vampires, etc. The King of Dragons Ankwelt. This aligns with the records of the church. Audrey nodded slightly, politely refraining from interrupting the son's narration. Derek recalled the contents of his textbook and said, "Back then, the most powerful and most terrifying dragon was the Dragon King Ankwelt, also known as the Dragon of Imagination. Apart from it, his son, Alzahad, blanketed the sky as well, overlooking the famous powerful figures across the land and sea. Its name was the Dragon of Nightmare. Regarding the Dragon of Imagination Ankwelt, there was a legend that whatever he imagined would manifest. The kingdom he imagined would definitely descend upon the material world. The future, it declares, would definitely play out and become reality." This. Klein suddenly frowned. If it wasn't for the fact that Justice Audrey was focused on listening to the son, she definitely would have noticed his abnormality, even if he was covered by the thick gray fog. The description made him think of sealed artifact 0-08. A declared future would definitely play out. They share similar characteristics. Klein leaned back in his chair. He looked relaxed, but in fact, he was even more focused. Dragon of Imagination, how cool! That's the mark of a deity. Audrey's eyes lit up when she heard him, filled with excitement and anticipation. Derek paused for a few seconds before continuing. Its son, Dragon of Nightmare, Alzahad, is similarly terrifying. It can control the hearts of every living creature and make them act according to his will. And these living creatures will find it hard to sense it, believing that their actions were of their own will. It will also fabricate real nightmares into reality, causing many living creatures to unknowingly participate in them. It would then give them the cruelest and shocking ends. Legend has it that it especially loves mischief, that it will let a prince kiss a princess to wake her up, but the princess has already mostly rotten away. It will make ordinary girls wear dancing shoes and dance in front of the prince, but find themselves unable to do so until their deaths. It will create all kinds of coincidences and push the fates of many living creatures towards tragedy. All kinds of coincidences. This sounds even more like a 0-08. Of course, I don't know much about the sealed artifact. Klein resisted the urge to stroke his chin as he made himself look like an immutable ancient well. What a vile dragon. However, its abilities are very interesting, Audrey said, half sighing, half excited. Is this the future of the Spectator pathway? No, I have to call it the Dragon pathway. I don't want to switch to another sequence. Audrey wished that she could immediately become a Sequence 7 psychiatrist and continue her rapid advancement. The son Derek answered sincerely, "It has been 2,000 to 3,000 years since the history of the dragon and the giant king. Everything I know comes from textbooks and legends, so there is no guarantee of its authenticity. At least your history remains intact." Audrey was in a good mood. And then? The creator awoke, and the dragon of imagination, the dragon of nightmare, and other famous dragons fell from the sky, losing everything, including their lives. This resulted in a lack of sunlight for 49 days, causing countless volcanoes to erupt, as well as tides that drowned everything. And after the dragons declined, they could only hide away in various dangerous areas. Later on, the giant king was destroyed by the creator as well, Derek said in a heavy tone. This is different from the history I know. Wasn't it the Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and the God of knowledge and wisdom who led humanity to defeat the dragons, giants, and kill their kings? Audrey felt confused, as though time and history were somehow out of place. Klein was also puzzled by this and felt that the true history was riddled with mysteries, especially as it was from the Second Epoch, a time more ancient than history. Most of the legends recorded in the church's ancient texts should be fake, but the history of the City of Silver cannot be completely believed. What would real history be like? He gathered his thoughts, smiled and asked, "Is the exchange over?" "That's all I know," Derek replied in shame. He felt that the information he had provided didn't match the value of the light supplement potion formula. Audrey quietly drew a breath, as the corners of her mouth curved upwards. "I'm very satisfied. I know my future direction," she added happily in her mind. After a few more exchanges, Klein announced the end of this week's tarot club. After sending off Miss Justice and the others, he didn't linger any longer and quickly returned to his bedroom to reduce the risk of being discovered by others. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall, Audrey happily paced back and forth, planning to reward Susie with a few dog treats. Just then, she heard a knock at the door. From the sound of her footsteps and the gate, she could tell that it was her personal maid, Annie. "Come in." Audrey looked at the mirror, smoothed her hair, and straightened her back. Annie came in with a piece of paper and smiled. "Miss, a telegram for you came from the southern continent." Southern continent? Alfred? Audrey suddenly thought of her elder brother, took the paper in delight, and examined it closely. It was indeed from her second elder brother, Alfred Hall. He had sent a telegram from the east coast of the Balam Empire and it read, "I've found the rainbow salamander you wanted. 2 in total. Please await its delivery." "But I don't need it anymore." Audrey froze, blinked, and turned her head sharply to Susie. The large golden retriever wagged her tail with a stupefied expression. Chapter 239, each having their own gathering. "Well, I don't need it anymore, but I can give it to Susie, and I can exchange it for other Beyonder ingredients." Well, Susie's potion is still short of the spinal fluid from a Farsman rabbit. Some things are easier left to Susie. It's far more convenient for her than for me. Every famous detective needs a good assistant. Aha! Audrey quickly made her decision. To her, this was no longer something she particularly cared about. As she put down the telegram, her pleasure subsided, and the worries of reality began to emerge. I still owe Mr. Fool intelligence regarding the secret order, the mission to assassinate the Intis ambassador, and a request from his adorer. I've finally experienced the feeling of being riddled in debt. Audrey, we can't delay any longer. Let's start. The girl quietly clenched her fists. She wanted to find a pen and paper and write a letter to Viscount Glaint so that he could arrange for her to meet Zio and Furs as soon as possible. She needed to delegate the mission. She picked up a fountain pen, dipped it in ink, and suddenly, Audrey held her wrist in midair without writing. She had just thought of a crucial problem, which was that she knew very little about the Intis ambassador Bakerland. In such cases, it was easy to misjudge the difficulty of a mission, either because no one was willing to accept it or because the mission had been entrusted to an unsuitable person, dooming the mission to fail at the very beginning. The resulting growing cost wasn't her main concern. Instead, she believed that the Fool would better reward her and help her even further. After pondering for a moment, Audrey turned her head to her maidservant, Annie, and said, "Tell Countess Jeria that I accept her invitation and will punctually attend her ball tomorrow evening." Jeria was the wife of Count Wolf, and she had invited ambassadors to loan from every country to her upcoming ball, including Bakerland Jean Madun. Audrey had planned on declining the invitation with the excuse of being sick, but now she was interested in the ball. After she observed Ambassador Bakerland and gathered enough information, she would meet with Zio and Furs. Audrey suddenly felt the excitement of participating in a major event that she always dreamed of. First manor in the Rorstad archipelago, city of generosity, Byam. Having returned to the real world, Alger Wilson changed into attire that was considered gaudy in the Intis Republic and went through the back door of the hotel into the alley and made several detours. He stopped in front of a house with no garden or lawn and put on a familiar white mask. Next, he knocked on the door with 3 heavy knocks and 2 light ones, separating them with 2 lengthy pauses and 2 short pauses respectively. After about 10 seconds, the door creaked open. A man wearing a pirate's headband stuck his head out and looked around quickly. "Come in," the man said with a deep voice as he made way. Without a word, Alger quietly walked into the room. Creak. The door slammed shut. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein drew the curtains open and sat down at his desk. The information about the secret order that was given to him by the hanged man made him realize that his target might have certain connections to the Intis Republic. At the same time, he was reminded of the words the hanged man had used to describe the Antigonus family: strange and terrifying. The beyonder who sneaked into my room last night to read the information and leave me a warning was indeed strange. The sequence pathway that the Antigonus family has in their control is the seer pathway which the secret order possesses. The two can be equated. That is to say, one can speculate that the beyonder from last night was a member of the secret order who works part-time as an Intis Republic spy? Or could the person not be a member of the secret order, but someone who used the connection between the Intis Republic and the secret order to obtain the corresponding formulas and potions? Klein began to boldly assume that as he carefully tried to verify. This can explain why my clown's premonition ability didn't trigger when the strange threadworm intruded. This is the suppression effect of a beyonder from a higher sequence that shares the same pathway as me. Of course, it's also possible that the iron-black threadworm posed no concrete threat to me. Similarly, it can be explained why the threadworm infiltrated my room the same night that I wrote the information regarding Ian Wright. Furthermore, it went straight for the desk. The other party is equipped with seer abilities, making matters appear reasonably logical. After repeatedly verifying his speculation, Klein felt that his guess was very likely close to the truth. If the person in question is a relatively higher sequence beyonder from the seer pathway, what sequence number would he be? And what would the potion name be? To have the threadworm in his control, could it be another component of a circus, the beast tamer? Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating manner while feeling amused. Perhaps my subsequent potion formula will be obtained from him. Is this the true meaning of the revelation I received from my former divination? Backlund really is the land of hope. Klein muttered a few words to himself and began to consider what to do next. He had entrusted the task of assassinating the Intis ambassador Bakerland to put an end to all latent dangers. He had to avoid suspicion, but he didn't have the ability needed to do so. After Ian Wright's whereabouts were revealed to both sides, he was confident that Ambassador Bakerland wouldn't have time to exact revenge on him in the near future and wouldn't add to his problems. Finding the extremely important item he mentioned was obviously what he was most concerned about. In other words, before that item is found, I will be safe. I won't need to rush to hire powerful, beyonder bodyguards. Even if there's any follow-up revenge, it's unlikely the ambassador will hire a high-sequence beyonder to deal with me. It's neither economical nor necessary. After all, Backlund isn't his home ground. The highest possibility is that he would still get the beyonder who sent the iron-black threadworm to infiltrate my room last night. He would at least be at sequence 7, and perhaps even sequence 6 or 5. He has the strength required and is familiar with the situation. When the time comes, I just need to hire a bodyguard according to this standard. I hope that before then, the ambassador will never be able to issue such an order. Klein looked out of the window at the fog which had finally dissipated, seemingly in a daze. He decided to continue heading to Braveheart's bar tonight. Firstly, this was to come into contact with other beyonders through Casper's so as to choose a suitable bodyguard. Secondly, he could find an opportunity to sell Massault's beyonder characteristic, gather some funds, and see if anyone was selling any powerful mystic items to enhance his strength. This was a plan that would never go out of date. After confirming his plan, Klein pretended to leisurely read the newspaper. He waited until the sky turned dark before slowly getting up and making himself tomato oxtail soup. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, he drew the bedroom curtains as usual and decided not to open them tonight. Then, summoning himself and responding to himself, he turned into the unique spirit body, bringing back Azek's copper whistle, Massault's beyonder characteristic, the self-made charms, all sorts of materials, and the tarot cards to the real world, leaving behind only a few items, such as the bloodied contract. After doing all of this and equipping the corresponding items, Klein's strength returned to its peak, And he was once again half an expert in mysticism. He straightened his collar, took his hat and cane, and left 15 Minsk Street. Iron Gate Street. Inside Braveheart's bar. In exchange for a glass of beer, Klein found Kaspers in a card room, playing Fighting Evil while betting on a boxer outside. He was leading quite a pleasant life. The familiar surroundings reminded Klein of the last time he had met Marek playing poker with more than 10 living corpses. He was suddenly glad that he hadn't brought Azek's copper whistle with him. If I carried the copper whistle that Mr. Azek had given me, I think that a dozen or so of Marek zombies would mutiny on the spot and come to entertain me warmly. I wonder what kind of expression he would have. Klein stood by the door, nodding at Kaspers Kalinin to indicate his intentions. Kaspers covered his cards and swore. He got up, walked to the door and said in a low voice, "I'll take you to a place where the people, although they aren't as good as Marek, are pretty strong. As for whether or not you can make a deal, it has nothing to do with me. However, I have to warn you in advance, you are not to anger them, or you might not be able to see the sun tomorrow. Of course, it's not easy to see the sun in Backlund after September." "Do I need to pay you?" Klein asked sincerely. Kaspers nodded, pleased. £2. I can buy a revolver with that money at a weapons store. Although they set the price at more than £3, it can basically be haggled for around £2. Klein grumbled and gave Kaspers 2 £1 notes. Kaspers turned his head to his fellow players to inform them that he was leaving. Hobbling along, he led Klein towards the bar's kitchen, and from there, entered the back alley and circled around a darkened house. He took out an iron mask that could only cover half a face, handed it to Klein, and chuckled. "Just pretend that you bought this for £2. I can buy a lot more with £2. Klein wore the iron mask and deliberately messed up his hair. Seeing that he was ready, Kaspers knocked on the door rhythmically. 7 or 8 seconds later, a small wooden board on the door was suddenly pulled open, revealing a pair of brown eyes behind it. After a long moment of scrutiny, Klein finally saw the door open behind him. A man wearing an iron mask stood there and handed Klein a hooded robe. He said to Kaspers in a hoarse voice, "Next time, remember to tell me in advance. Otherwise, humph." He closed the door, turned, and led Klein through the darkened living room into the activity room on the first floor. There was a candle burning on the coffee table, and the room was dimly lit. There were about 10 people sitting on the sofas and chairs around the coffee table. They were all wearing hooded robes and wearing iron masks. After putting on the long robe, Klein quietly found a chair in a corner and sat down. He heard a fat-faced man complain, "Recently, there has been a group of wild beasts in the sewers that have gnawed away a lot of the herbs I grew. They're very smart and didn't even touch the poisonous ones. I need someone to help me clean them up. You know, this isn't my specialty. I'm only good at concocting medicine and treating your illnesses." Chapter 240. Trying your luck? Good at concocting medicine, treating illnesses, and growing quite a few medicinal herbs in the sewers. Is he an apothecary? I wonder if he's a member of the Life School of Thought or a believer of Mother Earth. Of course, it's more likely for him to be unaffiliated. Klein listened thoughtfully but didn't speak out carelessly. In the Lone Kingdom, due to the Church of the Lord of Storms rejecting the eternal blazing sun and the God of knowledge and wisdom, while the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of the God of Combat were irreconcilable. As a result of this, among the foreign religions, only the Church of Mother Earth had obtained the right to preach, but under the tacit suppression from the 3 churches. They only had a few churches with very few believers, to the point that they didn't even need to form a team of Beyonders. And even if they did, they wouldn't be recognized by the government and couldn't cooperate with the police department. They would be considered as vigilantes. According to the confidential information of the Nighthawks, the Church of Mother Earth had 2 sequence paths in its control: planter and apothecary. However, the latter was apparently incomplete. The suspected apothecary didn't have his hood on. He revealed a black iron mask on his face, but it only covered the part above the bridge of his nose, making the quivering fat on his cheeks appear to stand out. I repeat, I need someone to clean up the newly appeared beast in the sewers. I only need the area around Backlund Bridge cleaned up. Payment will be with 4 bottles of my precious medicine. 2 of them can effectively stop bleeding and stimulate the healing of wounds. Trust me, this is better than going to the clinic to do a suture operation, and it's effective for 6 months. The man suspected to be an apothecary stated his requirements and corresponding conditions. He suddenly let out a soft laugh and continued to describe the case. The other 2 bottles can last 1.5 months, and can allow a man to find the urges from back when he was 17 or 18 years old and become a beyonder on the bed. Hee hee, you know what I mean. Even if it exceeds the use-by date, it can still produce effects, but it will also spread throughout the body. The user will become abnormally violent and their strength, speed, and agility will greatly increase before exhaustion kicks in half an hour later. Why does he look like those old military doctors who plaster their tiny advertisements everywhere? And shamelessly promoting the effects of his expired drugs. Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. Seeing the silent room after he said his piece, the suspected apothecary could only grit his teeth and say, "I'll add 30 pounds on top of my 4 precious bottles of medicine." Finally, a man sitting somewhere along the periphery of the couches spoke up. He surveyed the area and said in a deep voice, "I accept this commission. You should pay in advance with 2 bottles of medicine, 1 of each kind. Mr. Eye of Wisdom will bear witness." "No problem," said an elder seated on a single sofa with a nod. The lines on his cheeks were deep, his skin a little shriveled, and his voice had an ancient quality to it, so Klein judged him to be an elderly gentleman. "All right." The suspected apothecary heaved a sigh of relief. After the conclusion of this transaction, the gathering seemed to turn more lively. Soon a woman with her face completely covered by a hood said, "I want to sell 2 weapons." "Weapons?" Klein adjusted his posture and became more focused. Since he was temporarily unable to advance, he could only increase his strength by using external items. One of them is an inscribed steel sword. It was smithied by the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sunday. It comes with purifying and evil warding effects. It's the nemesis of water ghosts, wraiths, zombies, and other undead creatures. It can still be used for another 3 years. Of course, its sharpness is enough to kill. The woman's voice fluctuated in volume, a clear attempt to hide her characteristics. 500 pounds or the Sequence 8 potion, Barbarian, and it will be yours. How expensive. For me, there's no reason I must have it. If I were to encounter an undead that I'm currently unable to deal with, blowing the whistle is the best solution. Even without Mr. Azek, the messenger alone should be able to intimidate many undead creatures. Klein shook his head and listened to the lady's introduction of the second weapon. Meat cleaver, with exquisite mechanical structure. It can be transformed, making it easy to carry. This is a combat weapon, made by an outstanding craftsman. It's rarely seen, and will cost 25 pounds. There sure is a huge difference in pricing between weapons with beyonder effects and those without. Klein watched from the sidelines until the steel sword was bought by a sullen gentleman in another corner, and the meat cleaver became part of Mr. Eye of Wisdom's collection. There were successes and failures in the few deals that followed. The only thing that tempted Klein was a fortune accessory, a beyonder item that could make a person's luck with fortune rise for 3 months. However, this wasn't his main goal, and the price wasn't that great. Seeing that the atmosphere had turned silent once again, he slowly exhaled and said in a suppressed voice, "I want to sell something." After attracting everyone's attention, he took out an iron cigarette case and pushed out the crimson beyonder characteristic which resembled jelly. Without needing to organizing his words, he introduced it with something he had already prepared ahead of time. "This is something I obtained from a corpse. I'm not sure what use it has. It's just that I find it very magical. Maybe some of you know what this is." Klein deliberately didn't mention that this was a beyonder characteristic, nor did he mention that the crimson jelly in his hand could replace the main ingredient of the hunter potion. This involved the law of beyonder characteristics' indestructibility, and he didn't want to benefit the members of this beyonder gathering with this knowledge. In addition to this, Klein had the intention of probing to see if anyone there knew the law of beyonder characteristics' indestructibility. Such a person would definitely be stronger than the rest, or perhaps someone with a powerful background, making them suitable as a bodyguard. At the same time, he continued to disguise himself as an ordinary person who didn't know much about the beyonder community. Although the members of the gathering couldn't see his appearance through the iron mask, Kasper's Kalinin knew what he looked like, and quite a few people in the room probably knew Kasper's. Being careful and prudent were the 2 things Klein had emphasized to himself before leaving home today. Gazes examined the crimson object in his hand, but Klein wasn't a spectator and couldn't tell what they meant. After more than 10 seconds, no one spoke. The room was as quiet as a cemetery. At this moment the old gentleman sitting on the sofa, Mr. Eye of Wisdom, coughed and said, I have a rough idea of what it is and what it does, but knowledge needs to be exchanged with something in return. I'll pay 400 pounds. Believe me, it's a perfectly fair price. Of course you have the right to refuse. The main ingredients of Sequence 9 potions are about 150 to 200 pounds. 2 are needed, and they add up to about 400 pounds. The offer is very reasonable. This old gentleman with the code name Eye of Wisdom seems to recognize that this belongs to the Hunter sequence. He had no need for divination, and he was able to recognize it immediately. Could it be the Sequence 7 of the Sequencer's Pathway? Appraiser? Klein thought for a moment and said, "Deal. However, sir, you don't need to rush to pay. I still have another request." "What request?" Eye of Wisdom asked in an old voice. Klein pondered and said, "The thing is, I offended someone. According to your circle, he should be Sequence 6 or maybe 5. I wish to hire a bodyguard." "Sequence 6? Maybe Sequence 5? Why don't you just die quietly? If we reached that level, why would we be attending such a small gathering?" The suspected apothecary blurted out with a bit of a sneer in his astonishment. Although the other members of the party didn't say anything, from the looks of it, no one planned on accepting the request. Their thoughts were similar to those of the suspected apothecary. Eye of Wisdom chuckled and said, "Maybe you don't know our circle well enough. People at Sequence 6 or Sequence 5 are very, very powerful and terrifying people. Yes, there have been many cases of a lot of Sequence 8 and Sequence 9 Beyonders killing someone that strong, but those are events that are still very hard to replicate. I think no one here is willing to take such a huge risk to protect you. If you're certain that the other party is only Sequence 6 and doesn't have any mystical items, there might be someone who will want to accept the challenge this mission entails." "Well, I'm not sure," Klein shrugged and said. "Then I'll have to try to save myself. What can I get for 400 pounds? The mystical item you were talking about? Believe me, a mystical item worth 400 pounds certainly won't be able to deal with your enemy, and it will even bring you more danger. I suggest that you apologize to him. Sincerely apologize, and perhaps 400 pounds will be enough to buy his understanding," Eye of Wisdom said sincerely. "Frankly, I've thought about it, but I don't think they'll accept it." Klein was about to answer when the man who had accepted the task of cleaning the sewer beast suddenly laughed. "Maybe you can try your luck. I have a mystical item here that I can sell you for 400 pounds. It can let you hear the voice of a great being. If you're lucky and can decipher some useful information, you'll become very powerful, and it will no longer be difficult for you to protect yourself. Well, if you're unlucky and end up deciphering a curse, or fail to decipher it, then you'll be hurt, or even end up dying. Do you want to take the gamble?" Before he could finish his sentence, Eye of Wisdom growled, "Black Snake, don't mention that ominous item of yours." Black Snake laughed and said, "I'm not lying, I'm not violating the rules here either. I told him about the advantages and disadvantages and left him to make his own choice. The probability of getting useful information is approximately 10%. Do you want to take the gamble?" The Russian roulette of the Beyonder world. Hearing the voice of a great being. Is this the Aurora Order's listener? An item left behind after a listener lost control? Klein looked at Black Snake, that he suspected to be a member of the Aurora Order, and made many connections. "Perhaps I can bet on it?" "No, I can't call it a bet, because I'll bring this item to the world above the gray fog before using it. I can already bring real objects there. This way I can avoid most of the danger. However, this is only an item left behind by a Sequence 8 Beyonder. The corresponding benefit might not be that good. 400 pounds isn't cheap." As his thoughts raced through his mind, Klein nodded solemnly and said, "Deal." Chapter 241. Language of Foulness. There was only a single candle that illuminated the room. The atmosphere in the living room was so silent that it was as if everything had frozen. A few seconds later, the suspected apothecary finally muttered, "Why don't you leave an address? That way, I can get something out of your body. He looks like he's cursing me, but he's actually persuading me otherwise." Klein pretended not to understand and said to Black Snake, "I don't have any chance of survival if I don't gamble. There'll be that sliver of hope if I gamble on it. I won't sit back and wait for death." Hearing this, Eye of Wisdom, who was about to say something, shut his mouth because he couldn't offer any other hope. "I really admire your character." Black Snake laughed. "I also admire you. In the past I had quite a few friends who had such characters. Now, I visit their tombstones every year and place a bunch of flowers there. The suspected apothecary mused in a mocking but actually persuasive manner. He didn't care that Black Snake was a better fighter than he was. He said whatever he wanted to. Mr. Apothecary must have suffered because of his temper. Klein was secretly grateful. He handed the iron cigarette case containing the Hunter Beyonder characteristic to the attendant who brought it to Eye of Wisdom. The old gentleman counted out 400 pounds in cash from the suitcase beside him, and got the attendant to pass it on to Black Snake. Black Snake casually took a glance and said, "I believe in Mr. Eye of Wisdom." He took out a small wooden box, bent down, and placed it on the ground. He pushed the box so that the object slid to Klein without going through the attendant. The moment Klein's fingers touched the surface of the box, he heard faint illusory sounds and immediately felt a strong sense of dizziness. For him, this wasn't something he couldn't handle. It wasn't even comparable to the illusory voices of Justice and company when they pray to him. After sitting up straight again, Klein carefully opened the wooden box and saw an ear inside. The ears looked real, except that the skin was dark and there were a few green areas where it had rotted. "How do I use it?" Klein asked. Black Snake casually replied, "Grasping it without gloves is the same as using it. Heh, you'd better go home and try it when you're alone." Klein didn't ask any further questions. He closed the box and put it into his pocket. He deliberately smiled bitterly and said, "This makes me dizzy." After a short moment of silence, the suspected apothecary suddenly shouted, "I want to buy Spring of the Elves marrow crystals. Who has it?" As his voice echoed in the air, no one answered. The apothecary smacked his lips and mumbled, "Seriously, there's no answer every time this is asked." "Maybe you could book a cruise to Sonia Island," Eye of Wisdom quipped. The Spring of the Elves was also known as the Sonia Golden Springs, and one could tell from its name where it came from. The Spring of the Elves was a commonly seen liquid and was an object with rich spirituality. However, the marrow crystals were considered beyonder ingredients and not easily purchasable. After that, there were a few failed transactions at the gathering. Eye of Wisdom clapped his hands and said, "Let's end it here today. According to the convention, we leave one by one, each separated by 3 minutes. Leaving one by one, each separated by 3 minutes. This is to prevent the gathering members from being tailed and robbed?" When Klein received the signal from Eye of Wisdom, he stood up and, guided by the attendant, left the activity room and went to the door. He took off his hooded robe and handed it back to the attendant before following the path in his memories back to the back door of the Bravehearts bar. He then removed his iron mask and walked through the kitchen to see Casper standing outside the card room, over the barking of dogs and clamoring of people. "I'm delighted that you could come back." The red-nosed elder heaved a sigh of relief, the nasty wounds on his face seemingly trembling. Klein leaned over and said in a low voice, "Are there such gatherings in the future? It seems like you didn't get what you wanted. Holy Lord of Storms, I don't think you should continue wasting your time." Casper scanned this customer he felt worried for. "Maybe it'll take a few days. I don't know the details. Let's see if you can make it in time." Klein nodded and asked, "Is Marek here? You're still trying to convince him?" "No, it will only anger him." Caspers warned him in a deep voice. "He's in the card room behind you." "No, I'm not going to convince him. I'm trying to stay as far away from him as possible so that his zombies won't go into mutiny." Klein touched Azek's copper whistle in his pocket. "I understand." He left the Bravehearts bar at once, went to the one-bedroom apartment in East Borough to relieve himself before returning to Minsk Street. Inside the card room, Marek had gone all in and confidently flipped open his cards. He had 3 kings and a pair of 9s, and the zombie opposite him had a pair of 6s and an 8. Suddenly, the zombie took the initiative to reveal its hidden cards, a pair of 6s. This round, it won with 4 6s. The pale Marek sat there blankly and immediately felt all the surrounding zombies coldly staring at him. A few minutes later, he staggered out the card room on shaky feet and almost collapsed at the door while his usual entourage of subordinates inside the room fell to the ground. "Don't let anyone in before dawn," Marek ordered in a hoarse voice as he looked at the stunned Caspers. He took out a white handkerchief and wiped the corner of his mouth. The handkerchief was quickly dyed with a dark blue tint with some redness. After receiving Caspers's acknowledgement, Marek found a chair to sit and asked for a barrel of Southville beer. He stared blankly as he drank. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein followed his usual routine of washing up and returning to his room before he drew the curtains. After waiting for over 10 minutes and confirming that there were no specks of spirituality around, he started to summon himself. He responded to himself and brought the wooden box containing the black ear into the mysterious space above the gray fog. The illusory crimson stars didn't twinkle at all as Klein sat at the seat of honor of the long ancient table and opened the wooden box. This time, he didn't hear any murmurs or feel dizzy. The boundless gray fog seemed to isolate all external sounds. Klein let out a sigh of relief. He was now much more confident with his impending attempt and much more confident about his own safety. With a thought, he blocked his own hearing and performed a few experiments to confirm the effects. That's right. Klein nodded in satisfaction, reached out, and grabbed the black ear with signs of rot. He felt its coldness and slipperiness, but he didn't hear the voice of the great being that was described by Black Snake. Completely isolated? This won't do. It's impossible to use it alone. Klein muttered to himself, puzzled as he thought of the methods he could use to stimulate an effect. After a dozen or so seconds, he conjured a pen and paper, intending to emulate the process he used to spy on the eternal blazing sun previously. That time, I looked directly at the eternal blazing sun through the use of divine blood. This time, I'm only using the remains left behind by a listener, so it definitely isn't that dangerous. Klein wrote down a divination statement without any hesitation, the origin of this item. He took a breath, held the black ear, and leaned back as he recited the divination statement. After reciting it 7 times, his eyes darkened as he entered a deep slumber. In this blurry, shattered and gray world, Klein saw a man struggling on the ground. He rolled, screamed, and his eyes bulged out. His body swelled like a balloon, and countless hairs on his body turned black and long. Soon after, an extremely evil and foul voice rang in Klein's ears, waking him up instantly. It was different from the ravings and howling that came from the mysterious space above the gray fog. This sound was more penetrating, more purposeful, and more active. Klein covered his ears and isolated any fallout, but the same voice echoed in his head. He saw his vessels and veins bulge out as if they had become thick squirming venomous snakes. Bang! His blood vessels burst, and his veins broke off from his body, spreading out into slippery tentacles filled with sinister patterns. The gray fog slightly swayed, making the giant's palace look like it was about to corrode. Unlike the incident with the eternal blazing sun, Klein still retained his sanity and didn't roll over on the ground. He gripped the handrail tightly and endured the pain. After a few seconds, the slightly swaying gray fog regained its calm, and the evil voice that echoed in Klein's mind completely died down. One tentacle after another fell to the ground, and his wounds began to rapidly heal. Interacting with deities is truly a dangerous matter, regardless of the method. Thankfully, I didn't face the true creator directly this time. If not, I'll have remnants of madness and signs of losing control and would affect my body in the real world. Klein weakly leaned back into his chair and silently mocked himself. This process was within his expectations, and it didn't go out of his control. The only thing that surprised him was that the true creator appeared to be slightly stronger than the eternal blazing sun. Just as Klein's thoughts were about to wander off, he saw the black ear in his palm suddenly crumbled, turning into tiny specks of black light. It has become a pure beyonder characteristic? Amidst his confusion, he saw through the corner of his eyes that the sinister patterned tentacles were still twitching on the ground. They were the aspects of madness and loss of control that had been stripped from his body. These tentacles gradually turned transparent and were about to disappear. A flash of brilliance came to Klein's mind. He scattered the tiny black light specks in his palm at those slippery tentacles. An illusionary black gas rose up and turned into a sky that constantly streaked with lightning. The background was extremely dense and gloomy. All of this quickly disappeared from Klein's eyes. On the surface of the iron-black charm on the ground were many symbols, magic labels, sinister patterns, and twisted path numbers. Klein bent down and picked it up, with the feeling that what was sealed inside were howling maniacs. With the help of his divination techniques, he was able to barely decipher the use of this charm from its revelation. It was to let the opponent hear a terrifying roar, infecting them with madness. As for the final result, it depended on the target's ability to resist such attacks. If the target was strong, then they might benefit from it, but the price was becoming a devout believer of the true creator, and if he was weak, he would collapse on the spot, dying amidst tragic cries. I'll call it language of foulness. Klein muttered and said an incantation to activate it. Chapter 242. Bakerland. Early Tuesday morning, Klein woke up naturally and prepared 2 slices of toast, a piece of butter, a serving of bacon, and a cup of coffee before leisurely reading a newspaper while having breakfast. With the terrifying language of foulness charm, he was much more at ease. He was no longer as tense as he was before. Klein finished flipping through the Backland Bulletin, picked up the Tussock Times, and saw a news article on the second page. At 2 o'clock this morning, there was a fierce gunfight at Red Brick Alley in the East Borough. According to the police, it is suspected to be a clash between 2 gangs, one of which is the notorious Manger Gang. This Manger Gang. Red Brick Alley in the East Borough. A thought occurred to Klein as he left the dining table and found the map of Backland. With just a glance, he noticed that Red Brick Alley wasn't far from Bacardi Street. Furthermore, Ian Wright had previously appeared at the telegraph office on Bacardi Street. Was Red Brick Alley where Ian Wright was hiding? Was the violent conflict between the Military Special Department and the intelligence staff of the Intis Republic? I wonder what the result will be. Klein picked up the last of the bacon, put it in his mouth, and chewed it slowly. He had informed both sides about the divination the previous morning, and they had already locked onto Ian's location that very night, which implied quite a high level of efficiency. After taking a sip of coffee, Klein put down the newspaper and fell into deep thought. Suddenly, he heard the tinkling of the doorbell. Who is it? Klein wiped his mouth with a napkin and headed for the door, puzzled. Could it be a new commission? For the past few days, I've been out and about because of the Intis ambassador. I wonder how many jobs and potential clients I've lost. It's such a waste of my advertising money. If this goes on, my finances will be stretched to the limit. Klein suddenly thought of something and opened the door. Standing outside were 2 ladies, one of them being Mrs. Sammer, who wore a dressing gown. She had intricate makeup on her face, making her look more beautiful than at home and nothing like she was in her 30s. The other lady wore a wide-brimmed hat with a black tartan veil, and a darker, more fluffy dress. Detective Moriarty, I have a friend who needs your help. Stellan Sammer held onto her veiled hat, but there was no hint of a smile in her blue eyes. Please come in. Klein pointed to the living room, and while he was turning around, he took the opportunity to fasten the top button of his shirt and adjusted his black vest. Stellan nodded slightly and, without another word, led the black-veiled lady into the room. She knew the place very well, and without Klein's guidance, easily found the sofa and took her seat. Klein wanted to immediately start asking, but then thought about Stellan Sammer's style of doing things, so he asked with a smile, "Coffee or tea?" In his eyes, Mrs. Sammer was a lady who pursued a high quality of life and tried to show her superiority all the time. There's no need. The other lady took off her hat. She had good features, but the combination was disappointing. In addition, her cheekbones were too high, and she looked older than her actual age. A little anger, a little sadness, a little hesitation, a little fear. Klein read the lady's emotions. It wasn't that he suddenly possessed the abilities of a spectator, but that the lady's actions were just too obvious. Yes, neither coffee nor tea can solve the problem. Stellan imitated a position found in magazines, trying her best to appear classy. This is Mrs. Mary Gale, a shareholder of Coim Company. What would you like to entrust me with, Mrs. Gale? Klein sat down on a single-seater, leaning forward slightly and resting his arms on his thighs. Don't call me Mrs. Gale. Just call me Mary. Mary Gale pursed her lips. I wish for you to tail my husband and confirm if he has a mistress. It's best if you can obtain material evidence. As a result of the Church of the Evernight Goddess's active push for years, the Lone Kingdom was more radical in its marriage laws than the other countries, such as Faisac, Intis, and Lemberg. It stipulated that those who committed adultery had to pay a financial price for it, which meant that the adulterer would be at an absolute disadvantage during the division of property. I've heard that at least 4 out of 10 of the other private detectives are investigating extramarital affairs. I didn't expect that I would receive such a job too. Klein said thoughtfully, material evidence is not easy to obtain. I'll lend you the latest portable camera, Mary replied without any hesitation. As long as you have the evidence, I will pay you £10. If you only confirm that he has a mistress, you will only receive £3. You mean the so-called portable camera that's about 2/3 the size of my head? £10. This isn't a low price. Mr. Klein has been focusing on entrepreneurship and knew about the latest cameras. He hesitated for 2 seconds before saying, "All right, but you have to provide me with detailed information about your husband and his regular activities." "No problem." Mary paused for a second before gathering all her strength to say it. "Thank you for your help. I hope you won't tell anyone else about this," Stellan reminded him. Hearing this, Klein immediately sighed. "I'm a person who upholds confidentiality, and I often get into trouble for that." In the lobby of Count Wolf's house, men and women were dancing amid violin tunes. Audrey was carrying a glass of pale gold champagne when she, accidentally, bumped into the Intis Republic ambassador to Loan, Bakerland Jean Madun. "You're the most beautiful young lady I've ever met." Bakerland, with his thin face and slight stubble, pecked Audrey's white gauzed glove with a kiss according to propriety customs. His eyes looked passionate and bold. Audrey rolled her eyes and said with a chuckle, "Is this the way people from Intis talk?" "Yes, we are never stingy with praise for beautiful things." Bakerland chuckled. "If it wasn't for the style of the Lone Kingdom, I might have called you my angel." "Old pervert." Audrey maintained her graceful smile and said, "The people of Lone and Intis are indeed different." That makes me think of a joke. Please allow me to be presumptuous." Bakerland squinted his eyes and said, "After a good time with a beautiful girl, most Lone men would say, 'Oh dear, I'd like a cigarette,' but most Intis men would say—" He deliberately paused, and Audrey tilted her head, trying her best to keep her nausea in check while looking puzzled. "What would they say?" "Most of the Intis men would say, 'Oh baby, I have to return now and can't be discovered by my wife.'" Bakerland raised his glass and laughed. People who can laugh at themselves always have an additional charm to them. Audrey smiled politely. Her beautiful, clear, dark green eyes suddenly turned to look behind Ambassador Bakerland. "I'm sorry, a friend is looking for me." "It's a pleasure talking to you." Bakerland bowed and moved aside. Audrey moved forward gracefully and didn't look back again. Just as she was considering who she should find as the object of her excuse, a young gentleman approached her and, lowering his voice, warned her, "Audrey, don't be fooled by that Ambassador Bakerland. He's a dirty old man. I don't know how many women he's tricked into bed." "Bakerland is lustful? This is in line with my observations. This is a weakness." Audrey smiled without hiding her disgust. "Cants, do you have a misconception about me? Goddess, how could I be bewitched by that Ambassador Bakerland? His cologne makes me want to vomit. His words are so foul, and his taste is like a male peacock." Cants was Viscount Learson's youngest son, and their family was on fairly good terms with the Hall family. According to Audrey, Cants had entered MI9 after graduating from Tianjin University and had become quite enigmatic. Her original plan had been to have a chat with Ambassador Backlund and observe him up close before using the pretext of exasperation to get more information from Cants and his other friends from the intelligence community to learn more about him. To her surprise, she didn't need to seek out Cants Learson since he came over and started the corresponding conversation on his own accord. "Your feelings are correct." Cants gave a sincere smile. He surveyed his surroundings and whispered, "Besides, Bakerland is a very dangerous fellow." "How dangerous?" Audrey asked curiously. "Have you heard of Beyonders?" "I know that you've always been interested in such matters," Cants said with some deliberation. Audrey gently nodded. "I know quite a bit, most of it being told to me by Glaint." Cants took a glance at Bakerland, who was chatting with an affluent lady, and said with a serious expression, "He's Intis's intelligence head in our kingdom. He's done numerous atrocities, but we haven't been able to gather any evidence of his crimes. He's a Sequence 6, a conspiracist." He didn't go into details with an outsider like Audrey, nor did he mention that conspiracist was part of the Hunter pathway. However, Audrey was already aware of this. She feigned naivety and sighed. "He's really amazing. He has an assistant in the shadows, one that has perhaps reached Sequence 5. In addition to that, all of the Intis intelligence agents in the kingdom are under his management. Many of them are Beyonders. Unfortunately, we only know a few of them," Cants added in passing. "Don't be too happy if Bakerland praises you either. It's not what he truly thinks. He just wants to use this opportunity to gather more information." "I don't like what you're saying." Audrey looked up at the ornate chandelier and thought for a few seconds. Is Bakerland very smart? You haven't managed to get any incriminating evidence. He truly is good at scheming, but he also has a lot of problems. He likes to chase after women and loves the feeling of romance. He takes risks and is quite radical. If it wasn't for his identity as an ambassador preventing us from taking action easily, he would have been captured long ago. Kant stroked his chin and said, however, he'll be replaced very soon. Very soon. Why? Audrey asked in surprise. My dear beautiful lady, this isn't something you should know. Kant adhered to the principle of confidentiality. When the ball was almost over, Audrey, who had gathered quite a bit of information, found Viscount Glaint and asked him to help her contact Zio and Furs. Chapter 243. Catching the Adulterous Act Wednesday morning, across from the Coin Company, in the Cherwood Borough. Klein was sitting on a wooden bench outside the Gardley department store, clutching a paper bag containing the most famous Cindy Desi pie in the area with one hand, and holding a cup of iced tea in the other. Beside him, a tramp was curled up on the other side of the bench, sleeping. 10 minutes later, the mall security guard woke him up and shooed him away. Klein wore gold-rimmed spectacles which didn't provide for any vision correction and a silk half-top hat. He didn't look much different from most of the gentlemen around him. He idly looked across the street at the Coin Company, lifted his right hand, and took a large bite of the Cindy Desi pie. He felt the rich aroma gush out and fill his oral cavity. The reason why this pie from Desi Bay stood out amongst the southern pies was that it used a lot of oil and fat, but the meat was chopped into very tiny bits. With the fat and lean meat mixed together, it didn't feel too heavy. The rich, meaty juice seeped into the outer crust, neutralizing the dryness and made up for its shortcomings. The wheat fragrance was clearly brought out, and the small pieces of crushed apples were used to stimulate appetite with a slightly sour and sweet taste while neutralizing the oily taste. It's okay. Although the weather isn't good and the pollution is terrible, Backland is far superior to Tianjin in many other aspects. Foods of all styles can be found everywhere. There are all kinds of operas and plays available. They can be enjoyed as long as one isn't afraid to spend money. Although I might not necessarily eat or partake in such entertainment, I have these options at the very least. This is the advantage of a big city. Klein raised his sweet iced tea and took a sip. He never took his eyes off the Coin Company's entrance. For that £10, he had been sitting there since 8 in the morning. Even his breakfast was bought on the way there. Of course, for most private detectives, a commission of £10 was an absolutely enviable business, equivalent to about 3 weeks' salary for a member of the middle class. According to the information provided by Mary Gale, her husband was currently the first manager of Coin Company and was Luke Sammer's superior. However, their shares in the Coin Company came from Mary's father, and Mary had inherited it. One of the immediate reasons she suspected her husband of having a mistress was that an employee in the company had divulged to her that Duragu Gale would leave the office on Wednesday and Friday mornings alone and only return in the afternoon. In addition, he would leave work early for 2 days a week, and Mary had never seen her husband return home before 7. After breakfast, Klein waited another hour plus before seeing his target walk out of Coim. He was wearing a black top hat, a double-breasted tweed coat, and a standard bow tie. He was slightly fat, with yellowish temples, slightly brownish eyes, and a slightly long face. Duragu Gale. He silently recited his target's name, stood up, picked up his cane and his heavy portable camera, and crossed the road. Instead of getting his carriage driver to pick him up, he stood by the side of the road and looked around for a rental carriage. Klein took the opportunity to cross the road and arrive beside him. Pretending to be careless, he bumped into his target. Sorry, I'm quite lost. Klein bowed his head in apology. Duragu frowned, but remained silent, waving his hand to indicate that it didn't matter. Klein bent down, bowed, and walked to the end of the street. He didn't run into Duragu in order to steal his belongings and use the dowsing method to easily track him. That would have been easily noticeable. Instead, Klein had only done one thing when he collided with Duragu. With the help of his agility as a clown, he had secretly slipped a spare button of his into one of the pockets of Duragu's double-breasted coat. Going around a corner, he stopped and looked back just in time to see Duragu board a rental carriage. Klein was in no hurry to tail him. He waited patiently for a few minutes before slowly getting into another horse carriage and said to the carriage driver, "Just go according to my instructions. Head to the end of the street first." "All right." The driver didn't ask why. Inside the carriage, Klein leaned his cane and began performing a divination. However, his divination statement wasn't directed at Daragu Gale. Instead, it became, the whereabouts of the spare button of my clothes. The dowsing rod seeking was originally the most practical technique to find objects. Only seers were able to use it to seek people. Now, Klein was using it in its original form. The easiest and most convenient items to find were those that belonged to himself. Along the way, Klein kept getting the carriage driver to change directions until they finally arrived at a street house in the Hillston borough. When they first circled it, Klein noticed that there were gardens and lawns behind the house, which was different from the other houses. His dowsing method told him that Daragu Gale was inside that house. After paying the 2 soli fare, Klein walked to the door with marble statues outside. He saw 2 men in black and white plaid uniforms that resembled the police uniform. "I don't know you. Where's your proof of membership?" One of them, a brown-skinned man of Southern Continent blood, stopped Klein. "Proof of membership?" Klein hid his heavy camera behind him and asked with a slight frown. The brown-skinned man immediately turned stern. "This is the Quelag Club. Only our members and up to one of their guests can enter." Klein tersely acknowledged. "Then how can I join your club?" "You can only join after receiving a recommendation from 2 members. The brown-skinned man didn't brutally chase him away, but patiently answered the question. He couldn't guarantee that Klein would end up joining the club eventually. All right. Klein pursed his lips and decided to put Plan B into motion. He found a hotel near the Quelag Club and got a short-stay room for 4 hours. Then he locked the door behind him, drew the curtains, and entered the space above the gray fog. He conjured a yellowish-brown goatskin and a fountain pen in front of him. Taking a deep breath, Klein wrote the exact same divination sentence as before, "The whereabouts of the spare button of my clothes." This time, he didn't use the dowsing method, but a dream divination. The reason why he didn't do it in the real world was because Klein felt that the Quelag Club seemed to be quite a high-end club, and he suspected that there might be some powerful beyonders inside. In order to not waste time, he decided to get it done once and for all. In the gray dreamy world, Klein was the first to see Daraga's black coat, which was hung on a coat rack. On the carpet in front of it was a round table. The scene zoomed out, and the sight of a romping man and woman entered Klein's eye. The man was Daragu Gale. The woman had shimmering blonde hair who looked rather young. She was in her early 20s at most. The pained expression with her knitted brows does look rather coquettish. Why am I always seeing scenes such as this? Klein covered his eyes and woke up. The fact that Daragu has a mistress is confirmed. How do I get material evidence? By responding to my prayers? But this is limited to what I can obtain with my own body. I can only do it through sketching and not through the camera. I can't possibly draw a picture with my bare hands, can I? It looks like today won't do. I'll tail that girl and find out her address and name later. I refuse to believe that they'll be inside the Quelag Club every time they meet. Detective Klein quickly came up with his next course of action. Just as he was about to leave the mysterious space above the gray fog, he suddenly thought of something. He decided to take the opportunity to divine if the iron-black threadworm which had infiltrated his room was under the control of a beyonder of the seer pathway. He didn't do so before because he felt that the relevant information was too scarce, and it was difficult to create something out of nothing which would result in a failed divination. It would have been the same if he was above the gray fog. Furthermore, he had various matters to divine the few times he came above the gray fog previously, and he didn't have the capacity to bother with such a question. Now that he was free, he decided that it wouldn't hurt to do the divination. As for the question of whether it was risky to contact Azik, he had already long divined it. The answer was that it was risky, and not something trivial, so he could only use it as his last resort. After writing the corresponding divination statement, Klein removed the silver chain from his sleeve and allowed the topaz pendant to hang over the paper. The iron-black threadworm that sneaked into my room was controlled by a beyonder from the seer pathway. After repeating it 7 times, Klein opened his eyes and saw that the spirit pendulum was spinning clockwise, with great amplitude and frequency. Positive. The answer is positive. Shouldn't it have failed? Klein didn't expect to obtain such an answer. According to his seer instincts, such a divination was likely to fail. Why? He frowned and thought for a while before deciding to switch to a different method of divination and target. He wanted to directly divine the controller using dream divination. This time, Klein saw nothing in his dream, and couldn't get the corresponding revelation about the seer pathway beyonder. That's more like it, he muttered and thought back to the prior divination and fell into deep thought. They should have been a lack of conditions and result in a failed divination just like the one that followed. Could it be that this mysterious space had filled in the necessary conditions? Does it contain something of the seer pathway? Klein suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He had a bold idea. Perhaps, the mysterious space above the gray fog had something to do with the path of the seer pathway. Klein lightly rapped the edge of the ancient table. Despite thinking about it, he couldn't find any other evidence. He could only temporarily put this matter on hold and prepare for his return to the real world. Regardless, I've confirmed at least one thing. The mid-sequence beyonder beside the ambassador is from the seer pathway, and whether he's a member of the seer doesn't matter. This might be my chance of obtaining the sequence 7 and even the sequence 6 potion formula. Klein extended his spirituality and wrapped it around him before plunging into the gray fog. Meanwhile, in Viscount Glaint's study, Audrey let the master of the study guard the door while she looked at Xiao and Furs. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "I need your help with a mission." "What mission?" Xiao's eyes lit up as if she could smell the ink on the bills. Audrey gave her a polite smile. "Assassinate the Intis ambassador to the Lone Kingdom, Bakerland Jean Madun." Chapter 244. Appointee, what? Furs touched her earlobes, wondering if she had heard wrongly. The beautiful, naive, curious, and scatterbrained Miss Audrey actually assigned an assassination mission? Furthermore, the target is the ambassador of Intis, a powerful country in the northern continent. Xiao was slow on the uptake as she hesitantly said, "Our strength isn't enough to complete this mission." The first thing she considered was the difficulty of the mission. Audrey ignored her question and allowed her to imagine the reason. She said with faint dimples showing, "I'm not asking you to take the job. I just wish for you to find a beyonder with the strength to complete it. For example, Mr. A. I'll pay you 4,000 gold pounds for this. Of course, this is only my initial offer. The details are negotiable. If it eventually succeeds, I'll pay you 500 pounds. Even if the mission ends up failing, you will receive 200 pounds due to the risk you have taken." Her uninvested annuity and the rest of the bounty was around 13,000 pounds. However, any large utilization of it would certainly attract the attention of Count Hall, and even the Varvat Bank would investigate. She had calculated that 5,000 pounds was the tipping point, and it was best not to exceed it. 4,000 gold pounds. Xiao heard her own heavy breathing, but she quickly became depressed, knowing full well that she wouldn't be able to complete the mission herself. Just 500 pounds to seek out other beyonders in our names while maintaining it a secret. Miss Audrey is the most generous and beautiful lady I've ever seen. Xiao quickly returned to reality. While feeling enticed, Furs's mind was filled with questions. Why would Miss Audrey delegate such a mission? Is there some internal strife among nobles? Is this the precursor to inciting a war? Is Count Hall representing some important figure in a bid to make the situation turn chaotic? The duo quickly contacted Mr. A using a previously agreed-upon channel. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the rare sunlight shined through the fog and lit up the whole of Backland, they arrived at the house where they had previously participated in gatherings. There, they saw Mr. A sitting with his legs up and his hood over his head, but he gave off a condescending air. "You said that you have something important to talk to me about?" Mr. A's eyes moved back and forth between the two ladies. "I heard that some female beyonders would use their bodies to trade for potion ingredients with Mr. A. He's really a disgusting pervert." Furs curled her lips and said, "There's a large transaction. I wonder if you're interested in it?" Mr. A scanned Xiao's face and chuckled. "Tell me. Let's see what this large transaction is." Holding back the urge to draw her triangular blade, Xiao answered with the tone of a tribunal, "Assassinate the Intis ambassador to the Lone Kingdom, Bakerland Jean Madun." Mr. A fell silent, but since his expression was obscured by the shadow of his hood, Xiao and Furs couldn't guess what he was thinking. After a while he slowly leaned back and said with a deep voice, "So what's the reward?" 4,000 pounds. In addition, we will provide the relevant information such as Ambassador Bakerland is a sequence 6 conspiracist of the Hunter pathway, or that his weakness is lust. Zio tried her best to make Mr. A believe that there was hope in completing the mission. Mr. A chuckled and said, "I can accept this mission, but the reward must be raised. The first choice, the potion formulas to Unshadowed, Cataclysmic Interrer, Prophet, or Manipulator. Of course, their price is higher than this mission. There's no need for the complete formula. A partial formula will suffice. The second choice, 10,000 gold pounds. Heh, this is the bounty of Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. Bakerland's strength definitely isn't as strong as he is, but he has powerful aides. Besides, believe me, he definitely has mystical objects on him. A reasonable price, but that's also an exaggerated price." Zio and Furs looked at each other and said, "We shall return and discuss it. At this time tomorrow, we'll give you our answer." "Sure." Mr. A made a gesture of farewell. After being led out by an attendant, Furs murmured in puzzlement, "Those are high-sequence Beyonder formulas? Frankly speaking, I find it strange. I thought Mr. A would only want formulas or potion ingredients. Money shouldn't be a necessity for him." Zio turned to look at her friend. "Furs, you really are a naive clinical doctor and author. You must know that Mr. A has many subordinates. They need a house to sleep in, stomachs to fill, clothes to buy, and the need to vent their desires. All of this has to be bought using money. Besides, to some nobles who have declined, what wouldn't they sell if there are gold pounds to be made? Without his men, Mr. A would be just as scary, but he will be rather lacking in intelligence. That's what all the small gangs in the East Borough know." Furs frowned and said, "Zio, you're not that stupid after all." In the evening, the two of them met the familiar large golden retriever at a predetermined location and passed Mr. A's reply to Audrey. When Audrey finished reading the note, not only did she not feel stumped, she even let out a long sigh of relief. It was simply wonderful for her that she could finish the ambassador with just 10,000 gold pounds. "For the time being, I can only use 5,000 pounds. I'll still have to pay Zio and Furs 500 pounds. Well, first of all, I'll borrow 6,000 pounds, no, 8,000 pounds. I can't expose any problems with my daily expenses. Then, I'll pay him back over 4 to 5 months, with interest of 1,000 pounds. Before the new year, I will be quite poor, having only 1,000 pounds to use a month." Audrey quickly made her decision. Then she burned the original slip of paper and wrote on a new piece of paper. The second option. An advance of 2,000 pounds and the remaining 8,000 pounds will be paid after the mission is completed. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein saw Mary Gale again at tea time. He had initiated the meeting through Mrs. Stellan Sammer. "Madam Mary, I found out that your husband went to the Quelag Club while tailing him. However, I wasn't able to enter because I'm not a member of the club. Even so, according to my observations, about half an hour after your husband left, only one young lady came out. Her name is Erica Taylor, who lives at 126 New Year's Street, Hillston Borough. She used to work at Coim for a period of time and is currently unemployed. I took a picture of her leaving the Quelag Club. She's unemployed, yet she can live in Hillston Borough," Stellan sneered. Mary wore a gloomy expression as she remained silent for a few seconds. "You have to obtain material evidence of them being intimate." "Oh, the Quelag Club, right? I'll get 2 members to nominate you as a member, but you must fill in your particulars as famous detective. I can't get people to bring you in because it might not mesh well with the schedules of others." "All right." Klein hesitated, but still asked, "Who will pay the club fees?" "I will be responsible for the initial fees. This is in return for your efficiency. If you wish to remain in the club, you will have to pay the annual fee of about 15 pounds yourself." There seemed to be a fire burning in Mary's eyes. "The fee is 15 pounds a year, and the initiation fee is at least 50 pounds. A high-end club. Madam Mary, you sure are generous." Klein immediately nodded. "I will provide you with the evidence as soon as possible." After dinner, Klein went out again and continued to the Bravehearts bar in the Backlund Bridge area. There were 2 reasons for this. First, he wanted to show his helplessness in front of the military special department and the police who were observing him in secret. He wanted to appear as though he was trying every method to save himself. Second, he also wanted to deceive the mid-sequence Beyonder from the seer pathway under the ambassador's command. In matters involving the Grey Fog, Klein believed that the gentleman or lady would never be able to succeed in a divination, including his own resurrection and past events, as well as how he had successfully created the language of foulness charm through the help of the true creator. This is definitely a powerful item that can affect my opponent. Klein had to maintain his act of feeling unsafe and his act of madly grasping at all kinds of straw to mislead his opponent in order to increase his chances of victory. Under the dark night, Klein entered the bar. Before he could get a beer, he saw Kaspers, the old man with the brandy nose, standing in front of the rat-baiting ring with his arms crossed. Perfect timing. Marek is looking for you. Kaspers spotted Klein and limped over. Marek is looking for me. Klein asked in shock. Instinctively, he touched the Azek's copper whistle in his pocket and considered what excuse he could use to politely decline the meeting. Or could it be that wrapping the copper whistle with one's spirituality wouldn't cause any zombie-like phenomenon? It wasn't like Mr. Azek hadn't been to the cemetery before, nor had any corpses attacked him. Klein tensed up. Before he could come up with an excuse, he saw Marek, his face pale and his eyes filled with malice, walking over. He wasn't surrounded by any zombies. Where are his zombies? Klein thought with a mixture of puzzlement and relief. Marek pointed to the card room and walked over there first. Klein looked into the distance and followed him since there were no zombies. What's the matter? Klein took the initiative to ask. Marek, in a black vest and white shirt, sat on the card table and stared into Klein's eyes. Does that job of yours still stand? Huh. Klein wasn't able to react in time. I have a friend who is short on money and is willing to accept this commission. She's stronger than me and should be able to protect you. However, she can only protect you for 3 days. The price is £1,000, Marek said in a low, slurred voice. Why is a Beyonder willing to accept the commission only after I acquired the language of foulness? However, this is good as well. This will be able to confuse the ambassador's Beyonder. After he painstakingly defeats Marek's friend, my chances of success will become extremely high. The only problem is determining if Marek's friend is trustworthy. I'll go above the gray fog to divine it. Klein pondered for a moment and said, Give me time to consider it and save up the necessary funds. It's not a small sum. Also, it's best if the person protecting me is hidden. It must be confidential. As for the 3 days of protection, that is up to me. It's definitely within these 2 weeks. Of course, the seer would definitely be aware of it. Klein silently added. As for money, he had already considered it from the beginning. If selling Massault's Beyonder characteristic wasn't enough, he would ask Miss Justice for money. After all, he had made the preparations. Roselle's diary still had a lot of knowledge that could be sold. Of course, if the price was simply unacceptable, he could forego it. Now, although Massault's Beyonder characteristic had become the language of foulness charm, I still have Miss Justice. She still owes me the money needed for Sequence 8 Light Suppliant as well as the intelligence regarding the secret order. Combining those together, £1,000 would be enough. Chapter 245. Confirmation. Back home at 15 Minsk Street, Klein was in no hurry to head above the grey fog to perform a divination. Instead, he acted as though nothing had happened. In the process, he heard an illusory prayer and vaguely recognized it as a woman's voice. After experiencing the ravaging murmurs of the true creator, my ability in this aspect has apparently improved a little. Klein turned the newspaper while engrossed in thought and settled himself on the reclining chair in a motionless half-slumped state. He waited until the clock nearly struck 10, before putting down what he was doing and went to the bathroom on the second floor to clean himself up. Entering the bedroom and pulling the curtains shut, Klein went above the grey fog. He saw that the crimson star symbolizing justice was constantly expanding and contracting, and it was also echoing with prayers. Klein spread out his spirituality and made contact. Dressed in a white silk nightgown, Miss Justice appeared in front of him. Her figure was still blurry, as if she was in bed. After reciting his honorable name, Audrey cut to the chase. Ambassador Bakerland is a Sequence 6 conspiracist of the Hunter pathway. He's suspected to have a Sequence 5 assistant. After I obtained detailed information, I got someone to inquire Mr. A. He has agreed to accept the assassination mission, but the conditions are 10,000 gold pounds or any of the potion formulas of Unshadowed, Cataclysmic Interrer, Prophet, and Manipulator. They do not need to be complete. A portion of the formula would suffice. I chose the former and paid an advance of £2,000. Honorable Mr. Fool, was my decision correct? 10,000 gold pounds. The corner of Klein's lips twitched as he forced himself to focus on the matter. The Sequence 5 assistant should be that seer pathway infiltrator? The first thing that should be done is to overestimate the enemy. Would Mr. A have the ability to do it? Would he neglect the job after taking the money? Cataclysmic Interrer, Prophet, Manipulator, and Unshadowed are likely Sequence 4s. That is the threshold of a high Sequence Beyonder. It is very likely that Mr. A is one of the 22 oracles of the Aurora Order. To be stationed in the City of Cities, Backland, means that he's second only to the 5 saints of the Aurora Order's upper echelons. He must be the cream of the crop among the oracles. The Aurora Order wields the secret suppliant pathway, which is the direct route to the true creator. As an oracle, he has a high probability of being a Beyonder of this sequence chain. Based on Backland's position, it can be inferred that he's at Sequencers 5, Shepherd. Of course, he could also be a Rose Bishop that's one sequence lower, but that would mean that he's more outstanding in other aspects, such as his intelligence. I have to remind Miss Justice that she shouldn't have too many interactions with Mr. A. The Beyonders of the secret suppliant sequence are either already lunatics exhibiting abnormalities or lunatics who have hidden their insanity well, almost without exception. Sequence 8 listeners in this sequence pathway often hear the voice of the true creator. Yes, only a lunatic would be bold enough to accept the mission of assassinating an Intis ambassador and have the courage to complete it. I have here a portion of the unshadowed potion formula, as well as the corresponding ritual needed for the advancement. This can save Miss Justice 10,000 gold pounds. Why would Mr. A only need the formulas of Unshadowed, Cataclysmic Interrer, Prophet, and Manipulator? Are these paths that can be swapped at high sequences of the secret suppliant pathway? That's a bit too much. That makes it 5 in total. Unshadowed is from the Eternal Blazing Sunday. Cataclysmic Interrer sounds like it's from the Lord of Storms or maybe the Evernight Goddess. I previously determined that the Eternal Blazing Sun, Lord of Storms, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom have pathways that are relatively similar. Therefore, they view each other with animosity. From the looks of it, Cataclysmic Interrer belongs to the Lord of Storms and is Sequence 4 of the Sailor sequence. Prophet is likely from the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Then which pathway does Manipulator belong to? It'll be interesting if they can all be exchanged with the sequence corresponding to the true creator. Yes. I cannot give the unshadowed formula to Mr. A. Not even a portion. The Aurora Order members are all lunatics who are always looking for opportunities to take revenge on the world to the detriment of public safety. Items of strategic importance must not be traded with them. This isn't just a question of the bottom line, it also involves my own safety. Once the time is ripe, those lunatics from the Aurora Order might very well sacrifice the entire city. Let Miss Justice spend the 10,000 pounds then. Part of it includes the payment she would like to give to my adorer. The rest can be made up to her with the knowledge I already know. Klein reached out and pinched his cheek. He didn't reply to Justice immediately. Instead, he conjured a pen and paper, ready to make a divination. Klein had no idea who Marek's friend was. He could only tell from the pronoun she that the person was a woman. Failure was inevitable if he wanted to directly divine the reliability of the person in question. However, Klein could make an indirect divination regarding his own safety, which would have a much higher success rate. As for whether he would suffer an interference or how accurate the outcome would be, he wasn't worried at all thanks to the gray fog shielding. After more than 10 seconds of deliberation, Klein wrote, "It's risky for me to hire Marek's friend to be my bodyguard for 3 days." Putting the pen away, he removed his spirit pendulum, focused his mind, and quickly performed the divination. When he opened his eyes, he saw that the topaz pendant was rotating clockwise. However, the amplitude was very small and its speed was very slow. There's a certain risk, but it's quite low. Reliable. Klein nodded slightly and changed to divine about Mr. A. Similarly, he had no direct contact with Mr. A, and all he knew was based on descriptions and inference. It was difficult to find out whether or not he was capable enough, or willing to keep his promise. All he could do was make an indirect divination. As an excellent seer, Klein quickly determined the direction, and that was to divine Ambassador Bakerland. This ambassador had relatively more connections with him, and the information he had about him was even more detailed. Klein knew very well what the other party was involved in, and as a divination target, there were no problems. After some thought, Klein wrote, Bakerland Jean Madun will have his life threatened by Mr. A. To prevent it from failing, he tried his best to make the words vague in this low-confidence divination and didn't require a definite answer. This time, Klein saw that the spirit pendulum was still rotating clockwise, but it had become faster and the amplitude had increased. It means that Mr. A will attempt to complete the mission, and that there's a good chance of success. Klein slowly exhaled and began to respond to Miss Justice's prayer. Sure. There's no problems with your decision. You absolutely must not show yourself when entrusting this mission. My adorer wishes for £1,000 for his activities. It will be done in the same way as before, and it would be best if it can be completed by tomorrow. This will be payment for the light suppliant formula. You do not need to seek out news regarding the secret order any further. However, if you obtain any relevant information, I will do a trade with you. After learning that the infiltrator was a beyonder in the seer pathway, Klein's need for information about the secret order became less urgent. He had originally wanted to ask for more than £1,000, but in consideration of how Miss Justice had to pay £10,000 to assassinate the ambassador, it was likely that her finances would be stretched to the limit. Therefore, he only asked for the minimum. After doing all of this, Klein didn't linger and immediately returned to the real world. Audrey was holding a music score and humming a melody. The red moon was faintly discernible outside the window. Suddenly, a thick grey fog appeared in front of her. A figure seated on an ancient chair looked down at her and spoke in a low voice. Audrey let out a breath of relief after hearing Mr. Fool's response. She was no longer as nervous as she was. £1,000. My debt to Mr. Fool is close to being paid off. I feel so much more relaxed suddenly. Audrey rested the music score against her chest and thought with her dimples showing. Although she only had £1,000 to spend for quite a considerable period of time in the coming days, being put in a tight financial situation, all she needed to do was grit her teeth, and squeezing out £1,000 wouldn't be a problem. I'll borrow more from Glaint and drag it out with more installments. Audrey had quite a good education in finances. After all, her father was a powerful banker behind the scenes. At noon on Thursday, Klein heard another illusory prayer. He then confirmed that Miss Justice had deposited the money into his anonymous account. The bank reconciliation and liquidation done in Backland could be completed on the same day, meaning that from Friday, Klein would be able to withdraw the cash from any Backland bank branch in the city. After lunch, Klein once again saw Mary Gale. She led him outside the Quelag Club, where the two members were waiting. One was a well-known surgeon, Aaron Series, and the other was the aristocratic equestrian teacher, Talem Dumont. After greeting each other, the lanky and somewhat aloof doctor wearing gold-rimmed glasses entered the club first, leaving the equestrian teacher, Talem, who had short brown curly hair, to converse with Klein amidst smiles. If it wasn't for Mary mentioning you, I wouldn't have known that Backland has had an additional outstanding detective join its ranks. If there's anything I need to do in the future, I'll look for you. Then, let me thank you in advance. Klein smiled in response. According to Mary's introduction on the carriage, he learned that Talem was originally of noble blood. His grandfather had a noble title of Viscount, but it was a pity that his grandfather had squandered all his wealth. His father had nearly 10 brothers and more than 6 sisters, and as nobles whose titles were determined by the amount of land they possessed, once the amount of land went beneath a particular standard, the hereditary nobility title would be reduced. However, that also depended on the king's mood. Talem was unlike the other children of nobility, who could obtain a considerable sum of money when they reached adulthood. And due to his grandfather's reputation, he had no means of entering the government as an employee, or to be a butler of another noble family. Therefore, he could only play to his advantages and became an equestrian teacher for many nobles. His income was quite sizable, with about £400 a year. Sigh, divorce really leads to poverty. It was unknown if Talem was hinting at Mary Gale's situation, or if he was reminded of his grandfather, who seemed to be more of Intis ancestry. Unable to engage in the conversation, Klein followed him into the Quelag Club, where he saw a large brightly lit hall. Chapter 246. Strange Omen. Aaron and Talem left the Quelag Club after they separately completed the nomination form. It wasn't a weekend. The former had 2 more operations in the afternoon, and the latter had to teach Viscount Conrad's youngest son horse riding. The teenager needed to ensure that he didn't embarrass himself during the Backlund's social events in the second half of the year. Klein watched the manservant dressed in a red vest and a maid in a beautiful dress come and go a few times before finally delivering him his own proof of membership, and a badge with the symbol of the frost constellation engraved on it. An entry fee of £50. There are still 3.5 months left this year, with an annual fee of £4 a year. The manservant in the red vest pushed the two objects to Klein. Klein took out the £57 which Mary Gale had given him and handed him £54. The amount beyond the entry fee and annual fee was Mary's first payment. She was very pleased with how quickly Klein obtained information on Daragu Gale's mistress, as well as her photo. £50 membership. Madam Mary is such a generous lady. While Klein watched the manservant and the maid verify the money and confirm the exact amount, he recalled Stellan Sammer's private introduction. Mary's father was a co-founder of the coin company and had a 20% stake. It was originally just a small company that barely made money, but as Backlund's pollution worsened and the demand for anthracite and charcoal increased, the company rapidly expanded to become one of the top 10 companies in the capital's industry. As such, Mary's net worth skyrocketed. The only problem was that when she was married to Daragu Gale, the company was still quite an unknown company. Her father hadn't paid much attention to using the shares as her dowry, and didn't proceed with any protection of estate gifting, and had instead used the more popular willing of gifts. The former referred to the dowry as an independent and separate estate of the woman, and not subjected to her husband's control. Even the right of use depended on the woman, while the latter assigned the dowry's ownership to the entire family. However, the husband had to immediately make a valid will to promise that if he passed away before his partner, the split of the estate would be 2 to 4 times the rights and interests of the dowry received. After which, the rest would proceed according to the normal inheritance laws which could effectively guarantee the livelihood of the widow. If Mary initiated a divorce before she could get evidence of Daragu's adultery, the coin company shares would be divided equally between both parties. Klein remembered Stellan saying enviously, "The current value of those shares is currently close to 20,000 gold pounds. Adding the other property in their name, Mary is a truly wealthy lady. Once she's divorced, she will definitely become the target of many men in Backlund, including some nobles. That's only enough money for Miss Justice to assassinate Ambassador Bakerland twice." Klein suddenly thought about that when he saw the red-vested manservant and the good-looking maid bow at him. "Mr. Moriarty, welcome to the Quelag Club." Upon hearing this, Klein picked up the proof of membership and the frost badge. The former was made of elastic paper which looked like a card with Klein's name and his membership start date on it. After applying an imprint of his index finger, the proof of membership was officially ready for use. The latter was the Quelag Club's distinctive badge, named for its founding in early November, which corresponded to the month of the frost constellation. The symbol and the number 192 were printed on the front, followed by Sherlock Moriarty, imprinted on the back. "The club now has 192 members?" Klein asked casually. "Yes, our club doesn't accept people without a recommendation." The red-vested manservant beamed and introduced, "On the first floor, there's a buffet cafeteria, bar, library, squash room, conference room, and card room. You can use them all for free. The food and wine are free for your sampling as well. There are 16 lounge rooms and 2 small conference rooms on the second floor. They are also free, and can be used as long as they aren't occupied." The good-looking maid pointed to the rear and said, "There are 2 tennis courts on the lawn, totally free of charge. There are 2 shooting ranges underground, and you only need to pay the corresponding rental fee of the equipment. If you aren't satisfied with the simple buffet, you can order à la carte. We have an exclusive chef, and you just need to pay for the ingredients. Board, lodging, and entertainment are all provided for, as expected of a high-end club." Klein sincerely thanked Mrs. Mary. He smiled warmly and said, "Send someone to show me around so that I can familiarize myself with the environment. Afterward, give me a lounge to take an afternoon nap." "All right." The red manservant made an inviting gesture. After familiarizing himself with the Quelag Club's environment, Klein entered a lounge and carefully studied the layout of the place. He discovered it was similar to a hotel room of the later generation. It was said to be decorated in the Intis style. "I have to consider how to obtain evidence of Daragu's affair tomorrow. It's simply impossible to hide the flash of the camera. In other words, I only have one shot at taking a picture. And if I do that, I'll definitely be kicked out of the club. I have to think of a safe way." I'll read through the papers later and try to determine the progress regarding Ian's case through the news. From there, I can determine which 3 days I should be guarded. Klein paced back and forth, lost in thought. At that moment, his heart suddenly palpitated as he tensed up. Is this the premonition of a clown? However, there are no scenes in my mind. Klein felt the air around him turn still like it was the calm before the storm. Soon, this feeling disappeared, as if nothing had happened. Could it be that danger is approaching? But nothing like this happened when I was attacked by Massault. Puzzled, Klein pulled out a coin and divined if he would be attacked in the next few days. The answer was negative. After thinking for a few seconds, Klein drew the curtains and pretended to take an afternoon nap. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. He sat down and pondered for a long time before muttering to himself, I will be in grave danger in the next few days. After repeating the statement, he flicked the coin again and saw the copper-colored object tumble down and land in his open palm. This time, the portrait of the king was facing up. It meant a positive result. My reaction just now really was an omen that danger is coming. Klein narrowed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. He was rather puzzled by this matter. Whether it was as a seer or clown, they had never displayed such abilities before. Even if they could predict danger, it was because the target was right in front of him or beside him. There was nobody around me. From the fact that my divination was misled, it must have involved a relatively higher sequencer, most likely Bakerland's assistant. In the end, it actually gave me a premonition? This isn't scientific. This isn't mystic. There must be something else behind it, but I can't be certain why yet. Klein looked around and saw the boundless fog, crimson and still, the palace standing as it had always stood. He reined in his doubts and temporarily stopped thinking about the reason. Instead, he focused his attention on the attack that was about to occur. After several more divinations, Klein found that he could only confirm that there would be great danger in the next few days. It couldn't be shortened to 3 days, 2 days, or even 5 hours. In other words, he could only obtain a somewhat vague revelation. And in a dream divination, he saw Ian dressed in his old coat, standing in the street with the elegant gas lamps and the blurry crimson moon behind him. Other than this image, there was nothing else. How should I interpret this? Klein thought for a moment. He could only assume that this was the prelude to danger. Without further delay, he returned to the real world, left the Quelag Club, and went to the nearby Hillston branch of the Backland Bank to withdraw the remaining £100 from his account. The sum of £1,000 from Justice hasn't been cleared yet and reconciled. Without the corresponding information sent to the branches, the account wasn't synchronized, and, theoretically speaking, there was a loophole. Klein could withdraw £100 from another branch and seize the opportunity when all the accounts were out of sync. However, this was only in theory. In order to avoid similar acts, the banks had many rules on anonymous accounts. First, it was to enhance the transmission of similar information in the same city. Second, it was to limit a single withdrawal to no more than £500. And third, if the last withdrawal wasn't done locally, a telegram was needed to inquire about it. And today, Klein encountered the third situation. Putting away the money, he took a horse carriage to the Backland Bridge area and entered the Brave Hearts bar. Under Kaspers's guidance, he saw Marek sitting in the card room. He wasn't surrounded by zombies. Klein discarded the idea of using his spirituality to wrap Azek's copper whistle, slapped a £100 on the table, and said to the pale Marek, I agree to the deal. I'll pay an advance of £100. I'll pay another £300 every additional day I'm protected. The protection begins now. Marek's gaze fell past him and landed somewhere behind him. He nodded and said, All right, she has agreed. Klein turned back in surprise only to see the wall and nothing but air. He secretly activated his spirit vision. He but failed to discover anything. Marek stuffed the £100 into his pocket and said indifferently, You can return now. She has begun protecting you, in a hidden way. If I hadn't divined this beforehand, I would definitely think of all of you as cheats. Klein surveyed his surroundings and deliberately acted as though he left with clenched teeth. Along the way, he would occasionally activate and deactivate his spirit vision, constantly observing the outside through the carriage windows, but he didn't find his so-called bodyguard. Back at 15 Minsk Street, Klein closed the door, went into the bathroom, turned on the tap, and washed his hands. The sound of water splashing disappeared as he shook off the water droplets and wiped his palms with a towel. Then, he raised his head to look at himself in the mirror to inspect his appearance. At this moment, he saw himself phasing away in the mirror before transforming into a woman wearing a black regal dress. The woman had light golden hair and blue eyes. She looked very delicate, but her face was abnormally pale. She wore a small black bonnet, lifted her skirt, and bowed at Klein. This. Without hiding his surprise, Klein took a few steps back and leaned against the wall. Only then did he realize that this might be the bodyguard he had hired for 1,000 pounds. The image in the mirror quickly dimmed and Klein saw himself again. Everything had been restored back to normal. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.